Do you want to win $500? I'm holding a creepypasta writing contest, but only on Void, my new app, which you can join now over at lostvoid.app. It works on any browser. Submit your story before November at lostvoid.app, and if your story is approved, you'll be entered to win prizes where first place gets $500, second place gets $300, and third place gets $200. And the stories can't be true stories. If you'd rather just read some new creepypasta, go to lostvoid.app. I've posted several of my own sample stories for you to read, to get a feel of the app. And if you sign up now, you'll be notified of our official launch in early November. Let me explain how Void works. When we approve your story, it has 3 days before it dies and is removed from the catalog forever. During that time, readers must engage with the story, like permanently unlocking it to their personal vault, upvoting or downvoting, and adding it to their favorites. The most popular stories by the end of November will be the winners, at my discretion, of course. Writers get to compete, readers get to engage with cool, scary stories. It's a win-win. Just go to lostvoid.app. Coming to Android and Apple devices soon. Stories won't begin publishing until late October or early November. Rules subject to change. Winners must have PayPal to accept their prize. Anyway, I'm back to give you nearly 2 more hours of Alone in the Woods goodness, featuring, of course, AI darkness, which helps me out when my back is flaring up. If you like what you hear, follow and rate Alone in the Woods on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to Darkness Prevails here on YouTube. And if you have an outdoors-related scary story that you want narrated on Alone in the Woods, send it to us at darkstories.org. Thank you. Now let's begin. The Thing That Gargled, from JMN 484. Here is some background about me. I live in the south of the Appalachian Mountains and have always loved nature, and I study animals 24/7. I also have never been one to jump to conclusions like a cryptid when I see something odd. But when this happened, I just straight up don't know what this was. Now let's get on with the story. Also, there was no one else walking that day. One day, my dad and I decided to go walking near a lake. As we were walking, I decided to go to a little small trail that goes off-trail to look at the river. As I mentioned, I love animals and wanted to see some fish. Well, we walked for about 30 minutes up deep in the mountains. We finally decided to turn around. As we were walking back, I decided to go about 30 feet away from my dad. As I bend over to look at a plant, coming from around 5 feet behind me in the thick woods, this ungodly noise erupted. Like I said, I have studied animals and heard almost every animal. But this thing, it wasn't normal. It was somewhere between a gargle, scream, growl, and a howl. Then, as I was walking back, I heard the leaves crunching where the sound came from. I never saw something, but what happened next made my blood run cold. Right on that smaller trail where I had looked at the river, laying across the trail, there was a dead deer that wasn't there before. I also know it was recent because it was still warm, with a huge cut on its neck that looked like something had quite literally ripped it open with its nails. Also, the blood was still gushing. Something even more odd was that the hair on its abdomen had been ripped off seemingly in a perfect square. As we were walking back, I turned my head to look back at the area, and the trees there were moving. Not the limbs, the trees. I booked it out of there. I still don't know what that thing was. But whatever it was, I don't think it was normal. I'm not sure why it killed the deer for food, even though it was untouched, or if it was a warning for me to leave. By the time I got in my car, I was shaking, and well, let's just say that I had to change my clothes. And I have never felt this kind of fear. It scared me so much that the fear was almost painful. I even had weapons in my bag, but even with that, I still just didn't feel safe. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I stayed. Would I have seen it, and would I still be here? I don't know, but I'm not going back to find out. While typing this, my hands have been shaking the entire time. Some believe me, some really don't. But whether you believe this really happened, the fear that I felt that day was real. The only thing I have noticed when I looked on Google Maps when I looked at it was that my cousin had seen Bigfoot only 5 miles away from that place. I still know the coordinates where it happened. I just now remembered that, about 10 feet, there were some, what I think were remains, like some ripped clothes and a belt, which I had actually grabbed and still have. If you think it was just a hunter, why would we not have heard a gunshot? And the deer was warm, so it couldn't have happened long ago, and it wasn't there before, which I had only been gone for 30 minutes. The house near the river. From Frenzy. 2 years ago, my grandpa told me a story, one I'll never forget. He grew up in a mountainous area, in a small, quiet community, surrounded by forests and rivers. Recently, my mom mentioned that we might be visiting that place for summer vacation. The moment she brought it up, my stomach turned, and I couldn't help but think back to what my grandpa said. His story wasn't the kind you brush off easily. It was the kind that stays with you, haunting your thoughts whenever the night grows too quiet. I will retell the story from his point of view. We used to live in a very mountainous area. It was an hour's drive to the nearest town. It was a small community of relatives on a very large plot of land. Around 8 families lived there. We were surrounded by mountains, forests, and a river. To get to the nearest town, we needed to cross a 31-foot hanging bridge across the river. I mentioned that only 8 families lived on that land, but there were 9 houses there. The 9th house sat on the edge of the land, just a couple of feet away from the river. It was small, raised 6 feet above the ground since the surrounding land was muddy. The house was built out of wood and supported by 4 large pole-like logs as its foundation. A ladder, not stairs, led up to its door. It looked more like a cabin than a house, with a tin roof that gleamed faintly under the sun. Behind the house stood a large acacia tree, or to be exact, an acacia confusa. It was about 10 meters tall. This house wasn't part of the circle of homes shared by our relatives. No one lived in that house because of the paranormal events that were said to happen there. The story goes that the owner of the house wasn't related to us, but was a stranger who died under the acacia tree, attacked by a wild hog, or so I was told. I was around 19 years old when I decided to sleep in that house. I never believed it was haunted. I always thought those tales were just made-up stories to keep kids away from the river. But almost every night, people said they could see a silhouette of a man walking around the house. That night, I had an argument with my parents, and after they scolded me, I decided to sleep in that house to cool off. I arrived at the house around 6 p.m. The sun was already setting, and with the mountains surrounding us, the darkness was creeping in quickly. From the house to the cluster of houses where my relatives lived was about 40 meters, with no light along the way. The house didn't have electricity, so I used a candle. I got onto the bed at around 7 p.m., trying to sleep early. But I woke up to a knock at the door. I thought it was my parents coming to get me, or maybe to apologize. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. I called out, "Hello?" But no one answered. I didn't even see any fresh footprints on the muddy ground in front of the door. Mind you, there were no stairs, just a ladder, so it would have been impossible for someone to knock on the door and climb down the ladder without leaving prints. I shut the door and went back to bed, frustrated, but then I heard the knock again. I opened the door immediately, thinking it was a prank, but again no one was there. This time I waited near the door, holding the knob, ready to catch whoever was knocking. Not even 5 seconds passed before the knock came again. I yanked the door open instantly, but still, there was no one. I looked around and suddenly felt a gust of wind blowing through the trees, rustling the leaves and wrapping me in a cold breeze. The chill wasn't just physical. It made me shiver and gave me the eerie sensation of being watched. I quickly closed and locked the door, climbed back into bed, and wrapped myself in the blanket. After a few minutes of uneasy silence, I heard it. Laughter. It started faint, like a whisper, circling the house. At first, it sounded soft, almost playful, but as it grew louder, it turned deeper, more sinister. It was the kind of laugh that crawls into your ears and makes your skin crawl. My heart pounded, and my breath came in short, shaky gasps. Just as the laughter faded, a new sound emerged, a gurgling, wet and unnatural, as if something was struggling to breathe. The sound moved outside the house, slow and deliberate, and each moment felt heavier than the last. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I needed to leave, to run back to the safety of my family's homes. I grabbed the candle, unlocked the door, and swung it open. But as soon as I stepped out, I froze. There it was. A figure stood at the bottom of the ladder, half hidden in the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs too long and thin, like they'd been stretched. Its head tilted unnaturally to the side, as if its neck was struggling to support it. The faint flicker of the candle caught its face, or what should have been its face. Instead, it was smooth and featureless, pale and glistening like wet clay. For a moment, I stood there frozen in horror, unable to move or breathe. Then suddenly, the flame of my candle was snuffed out. Darkness swallowed the world. I stumbled backward into the house, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the lock in place. Then I heard it, the creak of the ladder outside. It was climbing, slowly, deliberately. The wood groaned under its weight as each step brought it closer to the door. My heart raced as I backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Then came the sound of scratching, long nails scraping against the door, testing it, searching for a way inside. The doorknob rattled as though it were being turned, but the lock held. The sound suddenly shifted, and I heard the creaking of wood above me. It was on the roof. I could hear its movements now, heavy and deliberate, the tin roof groaning under its weight. Each step echoed through the house, and the gurgling sound accompanied its every move, wet and guttural. Then, without warning, I heard the loud thud of something jumping off the roof. The impact shook the house, and the sudden silence that followed was worse than the noise itself. I stayed frozen in the corner, clutching the blanket as tightly as I could. My body trembled, and I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't dare move or make a sound. Somehow exhaustion overtook my fear, and I fell into a restless sleep. The next thing I remember was waking to the sound of my dad shouting my name. It was morning, and I was safe. I ran to the door, opened it, and hugged him tightly. I never told him what I'd seen or heard that night. My grandpa was visibly shaken while telling his story. At that time, I can clearly see and feel the primal fear of my grandpa. Whatever that thing was, whatever was lurking around that house, I hope it's gone now. I hope it died a long time ago. And most of all, I hope I don't experience the kind of horror my grandpa went through. Watcher. From Alara 678. I've always believed that true silence doesn't exist. Even deep in the mountains, there's always something. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl. But that night I learned what real silence is, and I never want to experience it again. It was late October, the time of year when the forests grow deathly still, when the air carries that crisp bite of decay. I had taken a weekend off to hike a lesser-known trail deep in the mountains. It was an old logging road, long abandoned, cutting through dense ancient woods. There were no designated campsites, no signs of civilization. That was the appeal, pure isolation. The hike up was uneventful. The deeper I went, the less the world seemed to exist. The sun was already low when I found a small clearing to set up camp. There was something odd about the place. Too quiet, too still, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was just tired. As the fire crackled and the first stars peeked through the canopy, I sat back, breathing in the cold mountain air. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the skittering of an animal, not the shuffle of wind through leaves. No, these were deliberate, slow, measured, calculated. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs as I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the tree line. Nothing, just endless gnarled trees stretching into the blackness. The shadows seemed more eerie in the silence. "Hello," I called out, my voice thin in the night. No response. I forced a laugh at myself and shook it off. Of course, who was I kidding? I was alone. I had to be. Maybe it was just the sound of settling branches, or an animal moving through the brush. Something, anything. But something gnawed at me. The footsteps hadn't been coming from the forest. They had come from the trail. The one I had just walked to get to my campsite. I tried to ignore the unease curling in my stomach, and turned in for the night. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the fire dying out. Unease settled, like a suffocating blanket over me, like I was being watched. And then, at some point, I woke up. It wasn't the cold that roused me. It was something else. Silence. Not a single sound, no wind, no insects, no distant owls. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it again. Crunch. A single deliberate footstep. Crunch. Again. Crunch. I barely breathed. The thin fabric of my tent separated me from whatever was out there. My mind raced. Was it a bear? A person? Crunch. Closer this time. I reached for my flashlight with trembling fingers. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then I saw it. A shadow. Tall, unmoving. The shape of a person standing just beyond my tent. The fire had died down to embers, but in the faint glow, I could see the silhouette. Was it a person? It looked like one, but it was so wrong. Too tall, too thin, too unmoving, too disturbing. It wasn't doing anything. Just standing there. Watching. I don't know how long I stayed frozen, staring at that unmoving figure. My body locked in terror. Then, the shadow moved. Not forward, not backward. Just shifted. Like it was adjusting its stance. Like it was getting more comfortable. And then, slowly, it stepped away, retreating into the forest. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping my knife with white-knuckled hands, waiting for the footsteps to return. They never did. When the first light of morning seeped through the trees, I scrambled out of my tent, heart hammering. There was no sign of anything unusual, no footprints, no broken branches. Nothing. I wanted to believe it had been a dream, a trick of the mind. But as I packed up to leave, something caught my eye. Carved into the tree beside my tent, deep and jagged, were 3 words. "See you soon." Something calls out to me from the woods. From Anonymous. I've lived near Blackwood Creek my entire life. Growing up in a small rural town tucked away in the Appalachian foothills, it wasn't unusual for people to share ghost stories, eerie legends, and warnings about the woods. Most locals, including me, brushed them off as folklore, just the product of imaginations run wild. It was easy to dismiss strange sounds as wildlife, easy to laugh away feelings of being watched as paranoia. But everything changed in the early summer of 2019. I had recently returned home after college, deciding to spend some time sorting out my life before venturing off again. My parents owned a modest property right on the edge of the woods, our backyard gradually giving way to the dense tree line that marked the beginning of hundreds of acres of forest. It was peaceful, a place I'd always felt safe and familiar. At first, it was subtle. I'd often sit out on the back porch in the evenings, relaxing and enjoying the calm. Then slowly, I began to notice faint sounds drifting out from the woods. Nothing alarming, just odd. I would hear the distant laughter of children echoing softly among the trees, though there were no families with young children nearby. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear what sounded like someone softly calling my name, the voice barely audible and almost lost beneath the rustling leaves. Initially, I shrugged it off, attributing it to my imagination or the way the wind carried distant voices. But the occurrences became more frequent, more vivid. One evening, I was taking the trash out to the cans behind the house when I distinctly heard my mother's voice calling to me urgently from the woods. Confused, I stood up and listened carefully. The call repeated itself, louder and clearer. The problem was, my mother was at work, miles away in town. A cold chill ran down my spine as I stared into the dense foliage. For a moment, I almost stepped forward to follow the voice, driven by a strong, unexplainable compulsion. Thankfully, something snapped me out of it, maybe instinct, and I retreated into the house. That night, I mentioned it casually to my parents, expecting them to brush it off as nonsense. To my surprise, their faces turned solemn, exchanging uneasy glances before dismissing the conversation quickly, urging me not to wander near the woods after dark. The uneasiness in their reactions lingered in my mind, planting a seed of doubt and suspicion. The sounds didn't stop, though, and soon other unsettling occurrences joined them. Sometimes, late at night, I'd awaken to a tapping noise against my bedroom window, only to find nothing there when I looked out. Occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving just at the edge of the tree line, indistinct figures slipping quickly from sight. I tried to rationalize it. Wildlife, shadows playing tricks on my eyes. But something deep down told me there was more to it. One evening, after weeks of these strange occurrences, I decided to explore the area behind the house. Curiosity and frustration pushed me toward confronting whatever was happening. With a flashlight and my dog, Sadie, at my side, I stepped into the woods just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie gloom over everything. The forest felt different as soon as we crossed into it. The air felt heavier, quieter, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. Sadie, usually fearless, hesitated by my side, whining softly. My pulse quickened as we moved deeper in, flashlight cutting weakly through the encroaching darkness. We hadn't gone far when I heard it again. My mother's voice, clear as day, calling my name, now from somewhere deeper within the forest. Sadie growled softly, pressing closer to my leg. I felt frozen, torn between the urge to follow the voice and the primal instinct screaming at me to leave immediately. Taking a deep breath, I called out, asking who was there. The woods replied with silence. Then, suddenly, Sadie bolted back toward the house, barking frantically. Heart pounding, I turned to follow her, my flashlight catching one brief, terrifying glimpse of something standing partially obscured behind a large tree. I couldn't make out details, only that it was tall, dark, and unmistakably watching me. I stumbled back into the yard, breathless and trembling, not daring to look back until I was safely inside the house with doors locked tight behind me. Sleep didn't come easily that night as I lay awake, replaying the encounter over and over, wondering what was out there and why it had chosen me. As dawn finally approached, exhaustion overcoming fear, I decided one thing. I had to find out what was happening. Ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. Whatever was in those woods had my attention, and I was already deeply involved in something far beyond my understanding. In the days following that unsettling night, my sense of normalcy began to fray at the edges. I tried to dismiss the whispers in the forest as nothing more than a figment of my imagination, a trick played by the wind or animals. But no rationalization could ease the nagging feeling deep in my gut. Something wasn't right in those woods, and no amount of denial could shake the unease that now accompanied every glance out my window. Determined to reclaim a shred of sanity, I spent the next several days deliberately avoiding the area where I first heard the voices. But even as I kept my distance, the forest seemed to pull at me, beckoning silently from beyond the tree line. I found myself constantly distracted, stealing glances toward the woods, half expecting to see figures moving just out of view. Sleep became elusive, and when it came, it brought dreams that left me waking drenched in cold sweat, visions of shadowy figures whispering my name from the dark. After nearly a week of this mental torment, I knew I had to confront whatever lay hidden in those woods, or risk losing my grip entirely. Gathering my courage, I dressed warmly, grabbed a flashlight and a pocket knife, and stepped out onto my porch at twilight. The air was crisp, heavy with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Each breath I took felt heavier than the last as I moved slowly toward the edge of the forest. I hesitated just outside the boundary where my yard met the wild. From this vantage point, the trees loomed tall and imposing, branches stretching skyward like skeletal hands grasping at the fading daylight. Shivers ran down my spine, and a quiet part of me begged to turn back, to lock my doors and never look outside again. But another, more stubborn voice pushed me forward, determined to face whatever waited among the shadows. Stepping into the woods felt like passing through an invisible barrier. The silence was immediate and unsettling, broken only by the distant calls of birds settling down for the night. My flashlight beam cut a narrow swath through the gathering darkness as I moved cautiously forward, the forest floor crunching softly beneath my feet. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as though the forest itself resented my intrusion. Soon enough, I found myself at the spot where I'd first heard the whispers. My pulse quickened as memories flooded back, and instinctively, I shone my flashlight around the surrounding area, scanning every shadow and bush. Nothing moved. No voices drifted on the breeze. It was simply still. Part of me felt relief, but another part felt a strange disappointment, as though I had secretly hoped for some validation of my fears. Just as I considered turning back, a subtle sound caught my ear. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable, the gentle rustle of footsteps over fallen leaves. I froze, ears straining in the near darkness. Silence. Then, slowly, the footsteps resumed, moving steadily closer. "Who's there?" My voice quivered despite my efforts to sound firm. I swung my flashlight wildly, catching only empty trees and shifting shadows. The footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by a hushed giggle, soft, childlike, and terribly out of place. My blood ran cold, and my hands shook as I struggled to hold the flashlight steady. "This isn't funny," I managed to say, though even to my ears the words sounded hollow and frightened. "Come find us," a voice whispered, drifting through the trees from no clear direction. It was the same eerie whisper I'd heard that first night, only this time unmistakably closer. Panic surged through my chest, yet I felt an inexplicable pull forward, compelled to follow the sound. As though in a trance, I moved deeper into the woods, my flashlight beam trembling, illuminating only small sections of the path ahead. Each step felt heavier, more difficult, as if the forest were trying to hold me back, or perhaps draw me further in. I couldn't be sure which. Then the whispering ceased. A heavy silence followed, and I stopped in my tracks, heart hammering painfully in my chest. I was surrounded by trees dense and foreboding, each identical to the next, leaving me disoriented and unsure of the direction I'd come from. Panic rose sharply within me as I spun in place, searching desperately for some familiar landmark. A branch snapped loudly behind me, and I spun around, heart nearly stopping. My flashlight beam caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, something pale and quick darting between the trees. My pulse raced as adrenaline flooded my system, urging me to run, yet fear rooted me to the spot. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing weakly through the oppressive silence. Only the wind replied, sighing mournfully through the branches. Then came another voice, soft, faint, but crystal clear. "We're lost. Help us." I stood there, shaking, unable to move or even breathe properly. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, yet a strange sadness washed over me at those words, tugging at some deeper, inexplicable sense of compassion. I opened my mouth to reply, but the words died in my throat as a sudden, chilling realization struck me. This wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me. Whatever was speaking, whatever was lurking in these woods, was very real, and it knew exactly where I was. Gathering the last shred of my courage, I turned abruptly and sprinted back the way I'd come, branches whipping at my face and arms as I stumbled blindly through the dark. Behind me, a chorus of whispers rose, urgent and sorrowful, blending with my own frantic breathing as I ran faster than I ever thought possible. When at last I burst free from the tree line, collapsing onto my front lawn, gasping for breath, I looked back into the woods, expecting to see shadows emerging to drag me back. But nothing followed me. Only silence and darkness remained, as though the forest itself was waiting patiently for my inevitable return. As days turned into weeks, the voices in the woods began to dominate every waking thought I had. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself instinctively drawn toward the forest edge, my ears straining, desperate to catch even a faint whisper, a small clue to help me understand what was happening. My normal routine had completely unraveled. Work and sleep became mere distractions from my fixation with the voices. By this point, I'd invested in more sophisticated equipment, a sensitive digital recorder and motion-activated trail cameras placed discreetly around the perimeter of my property. Initially, I tried to rationalize my obsession, convincing myself it was about security, about protecting my home. Deep down, though, I knew it was something else entirely. It had become personal, an unshakable curiosity, an obsession I couldn't let go. It wasn't long before I began hearing the voices during daylight hours, though they were less frequent and quieter, as if muffled by the daylight itself. Still, I could never quite decipher them, always just out of reach, tauntingly close yet impossible to fully grasp. They'd appear in moments of stillness, slipping between rustling leaves and distant birdsong. I would freeze in my tracks, holding my breath, hoping to finally unravel the mystery. But as soon as I focused too closely, they would vanish into silence. Determined to find concrete proof, I combed through hours of audio recordings every evening, listening intently through headphones. Most nights, there was nothing but the usual ambient sounds, the distant calls of owls, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush, and the occasional gust of wind. But then, I finally captured something undeniable. A clear voice, distorted yet distinctly human, uttered a single chilling word. Closer. The hairs on my neck stood on end. My fingers trembled as I replayed the audio multiple times, each replay only solidifying my certainty. Whatever it was, it knew I was listening. My heart pounded in my chest, a heavy sense of dread settling over me. Someone or something was directly addressing me. The trail cameras provided another layer of unsettling evidence. Scanning through the images late into the night, I caught shadowy glimpses of movement, figures obscured by foliage, never fully clear but unmistakably present. The shapes were always just at the edge of the camera's range, seemingly aware of their placement, always avoiding direct capture. Still, their presence was undeniable. Each image added weight to the anxiety already gripping my mind. Despite my growing fear, I couldn't confide in anyone. Friends and family would dismiss it as paranoia, and involving the authorities seemed pointless without concrete evidence. This was my burden to bear alone, a solitary struggle against something unknown and intangible. Driven by frustration, I decided to take matters into my own hands. One moonlit night, armed only with my flashlight and a pocket knife, I stepped into the woods, the digital recorder running in my hand. Every nerve in my body screamed in protest, adrenaline surging as I ventured deeper than ever before into the heart of the mystery. The forest felt oppressive and alive. Each crunch of my boots against the leaf-littered ground echoed painfully loud in my ears. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating twisted branches and dense undergrowth, shadows dancing ominously at the edge of my vision. Suddenly, I heard a voice, clearer than ever before, unmistakably close. "Here." Swinging my flashlight wildly, I searched frantically, but saw nothing. No movement, no figure, only the shifting darkness. The voice repeated, softer now, almost pleading, "Here. Closer." Something compelled me forward, against my better judgment, as if invisible strings pulled me deeper into the woods. My breaths came in short gasps, panic rising with every step. Just as I reached a small clearing, the voices erupted around me, a cacophony of whispers, layered and overwhelming, surrounding me completely. "Closer!" they chanted, growing louder, more insistent. In that instant, my nerve shattered. I turned and fled, tearing blindly through the underbrush, branches scratching my face, roots snagging at my feet. I didn't stop until I burst free of the woods, collapsing into the safety of my yard, the echoes of the voices still ringing in my ears. I never found out what was out there that night. My cameras revealed nothing more than shifting shadows, and the audio recorder contained only distorted static. But whatever it was, I knew with certainty that it wanted something from me. Since that night, I've stayed away from the woods, installing bright lights and reinforced locks around our home, clinging to the illusion of safety. Yet, I still hear them sometimes, faint whispers carried by the wind, just audible enough to remind me they're still there, waiting. and I know deep down that someday soon I'll have to face them again. The day the trails changed. From Hiker Jake. My name is Jake, and I'm an avid hiker. I've spent most of my life wandering trails and enjoying the solitude of nature. Nothing beats the feeling of escaping into the wilderness, away from technology, traffic, and all the noise of modern life. But sometimes the silence and solitude can lead you to experiences that are difficult to explain. This particular encounter took place a couple of years back in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It was early autumn, my favorite time of year to hike. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the air was crisp but comfortable. I had planned a 2-day solo hike along a relatively remote trail, one I'd tackled before and knew fairly well. The route led through dense forests, past secluded streams, and ascended to breathtaking vistas. The hike started perfectly normal. I set off in the early morning, the sunlight filtering gently through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. For the first few hours, everything was exactly as expected. I walked at a comfortable pace, enjoying the peaceful sounds of nature, the occasional bird call, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant trickle of a stream. Around midday, I reached a clearing, a small meadow surrounded by tall trees. It was a good spot to rest, eat lunch, and catch my breath. After about half an hour, I packed up my gear and checked my map one last time before continuing. This is where things started to feel slightly off. As I re-entered the tree line on the far side of the clearing, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The forest seemed suddenly quieter, more subdued than before. Initially, I brushed it off, attributing it to the midday lull when wildlife tends to settle down. But as I continued walking, the feeling intensified. I couldn't even hear my own footsteps clearly. Then I noticed something even more unsettling. The trail ahead of me, which I'd hiked several times and knew well, seemed different. At first, the changes were subtle. A tree I didn't remember, a bend in the path that felt unfamiliar. I stopped, pulling out my map again to verify my position, but everything checked out perfectly. According to the map, I was exactly where I should be. Chalking it up to my imagination, I pressed onward. But the further I walked, the stranger the woods became. Landmarks I had relied upon before were missing. Certain rock formations I'd photographed on previous trips were nowhere to be found. The trail began to twist in ways that felt entirely foreign to me. I decided to take a quick break to clear my mind, convinced I was simply experiencing mild disorientation. I sat down on a large fallen log to drink some water and get my bearings. As I rested, I took a closer look around me, hoping for something, anything, that felt familiar. Instead, my eyes settled on something completely out of place. Just off the trail, nestled against a moss-covered boulder, was an old, rusted bicycle. It looked like it had been there for decades, almost completely consumed by rust and partially covered by moss and vines. The rubber on the tires had long since rotted away, and plants were growing through the spokes. How in the world had a bicycle ended up this far off any road, deep in a remote section of wilderness? As I stood to examine it closer, an odd sensation washed over me, a feeling of being intensely watched. I quickly glanced around, scanning the dense woods, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the feeling persisted, crawling up my spine and causing me to shiver despite the mild weather. Deciding not to linger any longer, I resumed my hike, now feeling a little unsettled. A short distance later, I found myself again at the edge of a clearing, except this was impossible. It was the same meadow I'd rested at nearly 2 hours earlier. Confused, I checked my watch. The time confirmed that I'd indeed been walking for at least an hour and a half. There was no logical way I'd looped back here. The trail I was following didn't circle around like this. Frustrated and slightly alarmed, I double-checked my map once again, comparing landmarks. The meadow was exactly where I'd initially stopped. Every direction I looked matched the terrain perfectly, yet I'd somehow ended up back where I'd started. At this point, I had no choice but to accept that something was off, though I couldn't explain it rationally. My sense of direction had always been reliable, and I'd never experienced disorientation like this before. With growing anxiety, I decided to try one more time, taking the trail even more slowly and methodically. As I stepped forward, back into the tree line, the woods seemed to close around me more tightly than before, and the feeling of being watched returned with even greater intensity. My pace quickened involuntarily, propelled by an unsettling urgency to get out of there. Little did I know, things were about to get even stranger. I pressed on down the trail, my eyes scanning the surrounding woods with heightened vigilance. Despite my rational explanations, the forest felt different now, as if I had crossed into someplace unfamiliar. The shadows under the trees even seemed deeper, more pronounced. About 10 minutes later, I emerged into a clearing I had never encountered on any previous hike in this area. That itself was strange, as I'd traversed these trails countless times. Yet here before me stood a wide-open meadow filled with wildflowers swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. The air around me remained completely still, almost unnaturally so. I stopped at the edge, hesitant to step forward, feeling a strange reluctance. The meadow seemed untouched by human presence, a pristine pocket of wilderness. But more unsettling was the absolute silence. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, nothing but the faint ringing in my ears. I took a cautious step forward, the grass beneath my boots impossibly soft and silent. With each step, the unease grew stronger. As I reached the center of the clearing, I suddenly felt disoriented, dizzy even. The trees around the meadow appeared to waver, their outlines becoming indistinct and hazy, as though seen through heat waves on a scorching summer day. I quickly turned around, deciding it was best to leave immediately, but as I did so, my heart dropped. The path I'd taken into the clearing was gone. Where the trail should have been, thick, unbroken woods now stood. Panic began to rise in my chest as I scanned the perimeter, trying to locate the familiar path or any recognizable landmark, but the forest surrounding the meadow was dense and unfamiliar. I circled the clearing twice, disbelief giving way to genuine fear. Each pass around revealed only endless trees and underbrush, impenetrable and silent. It was as if the woods had closed in, sealing me inside this surreal pocket of wilderness. My breathing quickened, anxiety building as I fought the urge to shout out, knowing no one was likely nearby to hear. Finally, out of desperation, I chose a direction and plunged into the trees. Branches clawed at my arms and face, and thorns tore at my clothing, but I pushed forward stubbornly, refusing to stop. Minutes stretched on endlessly as I forced my way through thick brush, panic driving me blindly. Suddenly, I stumbled onto another narrow trail, and relief flooded my body. This trail looked different, but was clearly marked and familiar. I followed it eagerly, desperate to leave the bizarre meadow far behind. After a short distance, I recognized my surroundings again. The comforting presence of familiar landmarks calmed my racing mind. I slowed my pace, still shaken but grateful to be back on familiar ground. As I emerged from the forest and into the parking area where my car waited, I noticed how late it had gotten. According to my watch, nearly 2 extra hours had passed since I'd entered that strange clearing, even though it had felt like mere minutes. That night, safely back at home, sleep was elusive. Each time I closed my eyes, the surreal image of the silent meadow returned vividly. I've tried rationalizing what had happened, convincing myself it had simply been exhaustion, a misstep in navigation, or even a trick of the mind. But deep down, a part of me knew it was something more, something unexplainable. Since that day, I've returned to those trails several times, trying to locate that mysterious meadow. Despite careful retracing of my steps, I never found it again. Yet each time I ventured into those woods, a part of me anticipated turning a corner and seeing it again, quiet, untouched, and waiting. Even now, years later, I still occasionally wake in the night, heart pounding, remembering how it felt to stand in that impossible place. I don't know what exactly happened, but something changed in me that day. The woods I once found comforting now hold an air of mystery and uncertainty, a constant reminder that some experiences defy explanation and understanding. Sometimes the woods keep their secrets. The Old Barn, from Derpy Ghost. A few years had passed since the Hatman encounters, and we were getting nice and settled in our little farmhouse. Me and my father were up playing some card games. It was our tradition to play a few games before bed every Saturday night, and this time we got carried away and were up a little late on our last game. My mother had already gone to bed. It was just my father and I sitting at the kitchen table. We started to tally up the score of the game we were playing when we both started hearing the sound of faint moos and the whinnying of some horses coming from outside. "Did you hear that?" I asked my dad. He told me he heard it too, so we both went and took a quick look outside. We didn't see anything. We lived pretty far out from other people, so we didn't have any neighbors. There were no farms around here, just our property, which bordered the woods. My father figured there might be a farm beyond the woods that the sounds were carrying from, so we just went back inside to finish our game and get to bed. The next day, my father drove around and came back looking pretty confused. I asked what was wrong. "Well," he said, "there's no farms around here for miles. I just don't know where those sounds were coming from." This event happened night after night. It took my dad a few nights to realize the sounds were coming from the old abandoned barn on our property. The property had previously belonged to my grandparents. My grandfather passed before I was born, and my grandmother had passed a few years ago and had left the property to us. When my grandparents bought the place, it came with the barn, and they never really used it for anything other than to store some tools and things in it. We both crept outside to investigate it one night when the sounds started up again, but even after looking inside, we didn't see anything other than the boxes of stuff still inside that belonged to my grandfather. My father shut the door, and we started to head back when we both heard what sounded like a man coughing. We spun around, and my dad yanked the door back open to reveal nothing inside once again. My father put his shaking hand on my shoulder and said with a hint of fear in his voice, "Son, let's not talk to your mom about this. We don't want to scare her. Let's head back inside now." We hurried back inside and just told my mom we didn't see anything, which was pretty much true. A few days go by and we're in bed. I woke to the smell of smoke and wasn't sure where it was coming from. I looked around for a while in my room before looking outside my window. I pressed up against the window and saw that there was smoke coming from the old barn. I ran and fetched my dad, yelling at him about the barn being on fire. My dad told me and my mom to both stay put, and he got dressed in a hurry. Both my parents smelled that smoke too, My dad rushed for the door, flung it open, and saw the barn still standing. There was no fire, nothing at all, just the faint smell of smoke. We were very confused, and my father decided to walk up to the barn. I convinced my dad to let me join him. As we approached it, I started feeling this oppressive feeling of dread. I stopped and pleaded with my dad that we should turn back. "I don't feel right, Dad," I said to him, tugging on his shirt. He replied, "I have to make sure there really is no fire over at that barn. I don't want anything spreading if there is." "Okay," I said, reluctantly. We got a little closer and started hearing what sounded like screaming farm animals all around us. The sounds were horrible and froze us in our tracks. When we came to our senses, we retreated immediately back into the house. My mom was standing in the doorway and held open the door as we ran inside. She told us she heard the screaming too. We were all just shaken up about it, and none of us got any sleep that night. After a few days, my dad found out from some of the local farmers that prior to my grandparents buying this property, there was a barn built a long time ago, and the current farmer who owned it at that time lived alone and was a drunk. One night, he was feeding his livestock and passed out drunk with a lit cigarette and set the barn on fire. He and all those animals sadly perished in the fire. The next people to own it built a new barn over where the old one used to be, and years after they up and moved real fast for some reason, and then my grandparents bought the property. The sounds of those ghostly farm animals became a normal thing for us while we continued to live there. We just learned to tune them out. But occasionally, on certain nights, we would smell that smoke and remember what we experienced that night. And I confess that neither one of us went to that barn at night ever again. The Thing in the Woods Behind My Childhood Home, from CKY2K. When I was a kid, my family lived in a small town in Pennsylvania. Our house wasn't special or anything, but the best thing about it was that it was right next to a big patch of woods. All the kids from the neighborhood would meet there every day after school and during the weekends. We would play all kinds of games like hide and seek, tag, or build forts out of branches and leaves. Back then, we didn't have cell phones or tablets, so spending hours in the woods was the best thing we could think to do. I had a group of friends I played with all the time. There was me, my best friend Mike, another kid named Josh, and a girl named Sarah who was really brave and wasn't afraid to do stuff that scared the rest of us. One day, it was a normal Saturday morning. We had finished our cartoons, eaten breakfast, and met up near the edge of the woods as usual. That day, we decided we wanted to play hide and seek first. Josh was counting, and the rest of us ran into the woods to find a good hiding spot. Mike and I stuck together, and Sarah went off on her own because she always said we were bad at hiding and got her caught every time. Mike and I found a fallen tree surrounded by some thick bushes and crouched behind it, trying not to laugh or make noise. We heard Josh shout, "Ready or not, here I come," and we hunkered down even lower. But as we waited, Mike suddenly nudged me with his elbow and pointed further into the woods. I didn't see anything at first, but Mike kept pointing, his face looking serious, which wasn't normal for him. When I finally saw it, my stomach felt weird, like when you're nervous about something you can't really understand. There was someone or something moving between the trees far away from us. It wasn't moving normally, though. It seemed to almost glide rather than walk. It was hard to see clearly because it stayed behind the trees, moving from shadow to shadow. It was tall and skinny, taller than any grown-up I knew, but something about how it moved made it seem even stranger. Mike whispered, "What is that?" I shook my head, my eyes wide. I don't know. We both just stayed frozen, watching. The thing would move from one tree to another, stop for a moment, and then move again. It didn't seem to notice us, or if it did, it didn't care. After what felt like forever, it moved deeper into the woods and disappeared. By this point, Josh had found Sarah, and we heard them calling our names. We came out from our hiding spot, and they laughed at us because we looked scared. We told them what we'd seen, but Sarah thought we were just trying to scare her. Josh wasn't sure, but didn't want to sound afraid, so he agreed with Sarah. After that, none of us wanted to play hide and seek anymore. We decided to build a fort instead, something that felt safe and would keep our minds busy. As we gathered branches and stacked them, I kept looking around, expecting to see that strange figure again. But there was nothing. Still, I felt uneasy the whole day. As we built the fort, we started talking about other scary things. Josh told a story he'd heard about someone who saw lights in the woods at night, and Sarah said she heard weird noises outside her house sometimes. Mike and I stayed quiet, listening to their stories but thinking about what we'd seen earlier. Even though we didn't talk about it much more that day, I could tell Mike was still thinking about it too. Once we finished the fort, we sat inside for a while, eating some snacks Sarah had brought and talking about our plans for tomorrow. The longer we stayed there, the more comfortable I started to feel again. It felt safer inside our little fort. Eventually, we started joking and laughing like normal, and it almost felt like nothing strange had happened at all. But eventually, it got late, and we all started to head home. Just before I left the woods, I looked back one last time, and I swear, deep in the trees, I saw it again. It was only there for a second, like a shadow moving, but I knew what I'd seen. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about that strange thing we'd seen. I wondered if it was still there, out in the darkness of the woods. I thought about how it moved, the strange way it glided from tree to tree. The more I thought about it, the more scared I got. The next morning, I met up with my friends again. Mike looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. We didn't say anything about what we'd seen, but I knew he was thinking about it too. Josh and Sarah acted normal, but Mike and I stayed quiet most of the day. We kept playing in the woods, but it felt different somehow, like something had changed. After that day, things weren't quite the same. I still went into the woods, but I was always watching, always feeling like something was there, hiding and watching back. Mike and I talked about it sometimes, but Josh and Sarah mostly forgot about it. Mike moved away the next summer, and I didn't feel like going into the woods alone. Even now, years later, whenever I visit my old hometown and drive by that old house, I look at those woods, and I wonder if that thing is still there. Whatever it was, I never figured out what it could have been, and sometimes I think it's better that way. A few stories from a search and rescue responder. From Ranger D. When I first joined search and rescue, I didn't think much about the things people warned me about. You know, those stories you hear from older rangers and first responders. Strange disappearances, weird noises, things that just don't add up. I chalked it up to stress, exhaustion, and too much time in the woods. But after more than a decade of doing this job, I'll tell you this. Not everything out there has a neat explanation. I've seen and heard things that don't fit into any training manual, but there's a few incidents that stand out more than the rest. I think about them more often than I'd like to admit. This first one was about 4 years ago. I was part of a team based in the Pacific Northwest. Our district covered thousands of acres of forest, mountainous terrain, and a handful of remote campsites popular with the more adventurous types. The call came in just after sunrise. A man in his late 20s had gone missing overnight. His friends said he left their campsite around dusk to get a better look at the stars and never came back. They searched for him themselves until it got too dark, and when he still hadn't returned by morning, they hiked down the mountain and called it in. We assembled a team fast. By 8 a.m., we were loaded up and on the trail. I remember the weather clearly, cool and overcast, not unusual for the time of year. We had 3 teams deployed, one to sweep the trail he was last seen on, one to comb the forest to the north, and a third to follow the ridge line where they believed he might have gone to stargaze. I was assigned to the ridge team. It was me, another veteran named Carl, and a younger guy, Marcus, who was still pretty green. We moved fast, but carefully, calling out the man's name every few minutes and checking for any signs he'd passed through. We found footprints early on, headed west along the ridge. They were consistent with the hiking boots his friends said he was wearing. That was the first good sign, and for a while, it felt like a routine search. About 3 hours in, things started to feel off. We came to a point where the trail split. The main path veered right and started heading downhill, while a narrower, less maintained trail continued straight along the ridge. The prints we were following took the narrow trail. That wasn't necessarily strange on its own. Hikers take detours all the time. But I remember stopping and looking down that overgrown path and getting this weird feeling in my chest, like something was pulling tight from the inside. Carl looked at me and said, "You feel that too?" Marcus, oblivious, was already a few steps down the trail. Carl and I exchanged a glance but didn't say much. We kept going. That part of the ridge didn't see much foot traffic. The trees grew closer together, and the air felt heavier, damper. The further we walked, the quieter it got. I know that sounds like a cliché, but I mean it in the most literal way. There were no birds, no rustling, nothing but our boots and our breathing. About 30 minutes down that trail, we found something strange. The footprints we were following suddenly stopped. I don't mean they turned off the trail or faded out gradually. I mean they just stopped. Clear prints, left, right, left, then nothing. We spent a solid 20 minutes circling the area, checking for signs he might have stepped off into the brush. Nothing. No broken branches, no scuffed dirt. It was like he just vanished into thin air. Marcus was getting anxious, and I can't blame him. It was unsettling. Carl suggested we keep moving forward a bit, just to see if maybe the prints picked up again. I wasn't thrilled with the idea, but I agreed. Maybe 10 minutes later, we found something else. There was a clearing up ahead, small but noticeable. In the center was what looked like a fire ring made of stones, old and unused. That wasn't the strange part. What was strange was the pile of clothes next to it, folded neatly. Pants, boots, shirt, even socks, all stacked like someone had just changed and walked off naked into the trees. We checked the tags and labels. They matched the missing man's description. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just his clothes. We radioed it in, gave our location, and were told to hold there while they decided what to do next. Carl and Marcus sat on a fallen log while I walked the perimeter of the clearing. That uneasy feeling was back, stronger this time. It felt like something was watching us, but every time I turned around, the woods were empty. I remember glancing up at the tree line and seeing something move. Just for a second. A flicker of motion between two trees, too fast to make out. I stared at that spot for a long time, waiting for it to happen again, but it never did. About an hour later, we were told to head back. A helicopter was being dispatched for an aerial sweep, and we were to regroup at base and wait for further instructions. None of us argued. The walk back was fast and quiet. We didn't talk about what we saw. We didn't have to. They never found the man. Not that day, not the next, not ever. His clothes were taken in as evidence, and his friends were questioned again. But the trail went cold. No sign of foul play, no sign he got lost. Officially, he was listed as a missing person. Unofficially? Well, we don't talk about that ridge anymore. Not unless we have to. That was one of the last calls I ever went on before transferring to a new region. I still do this job, and I still believe in what we do. But I also know that there are places in the woods where the rules don't work the same. Places that take and don't give back. And if you ever find yourself standing at a fork in the trail, looking at a path that makes your chest tighten and your gut twist, turn around. Some things don't want to be found. For the sake of anonymity, call me Derek. I've been doing search and rescue in the Pacific Northwest for close to 15 years. You see a lot of things when you do this job. Some heartbreaking, some incredible, and some that just don't make a bit of sense. I've pulled folks off cliffs, carried kids out of caves, and helped bring closure to families when it was too late to save someone. But out of everything I've seen, there's one call I keep coming back to. One I can't help but think about when the woods get quiet. This story, if it was the only one I had, would be more than enough to keep most folks out of those woods. It was mid-September, a few years back. The air had that crispness to it that comes right before the leaves start to change. We got a call just before noon. A solo hiker had failed to check in after a 2-day loop through the Cascades. He'd left a note with his partner saying which route he planned to take, and when he didn't show up or respond to any messages, she called it in. From the look of things, he'd been experienced. Plenty of gear, regular trails, nothing too off the beaten path. But that doesn't mean much out there. Even the most experienced mountaineers make mistakes. We assembled a team of 4, me, a rookie named Alvarez, and 2 others I'd worked with for years, Jen and Marcus, who was with me on that first story. Solid people. We took 2 trucks out to the last known trailhead, split up into pairs, and started combing through the area based on the hikers' planned route. It was a long, quiet stretch. Nothing out of the ordinary for the first few hours. Me and Alvarez took the North Fork, while Jen and Marcus headed south. There were signs the guy had passed through. Boot prints, an empty snack wrapper that probably fell out of his pack. Nothing to suggest he was in trouble. But about 4 hours in, we hit a strange patch. Now I've walked enough forest in my life to know when something feels wrong. The birds go silent. The air gets heavy. Seems to be a universal trend, and that's how it was here. Like the woods were holding their breath. Alvarez noticed it too. He kept looking around like he was expecting something to pop out at him. "You feel that?" he asked me. "Yeah," I said. "Keep your head on a swivel." About 20 minutes after that, we came across something I can't really explain. The trail split, and there was a marker tied to a branch. Bright orange tape, just like we used during searches. But we hadn't been this way yet, and none of the other teams had either. I radioed Jen and Marcus to ask if they'd marked the trail for some reason. They hadn't. Said they were still at least 2 miles south and hadn't crossed any intersecting trails yet. So who marked it? We decided to follow it for a bit. The tape led us deeper into a section of forest that didn't look right. Trees were thicker here, the ground wetter. Moss covered everything like a blanket. It had that old growth feeling, like this part of the woods hadn't been disturbed in decades, maybe longer. We followed the markers for another mile, maybe a bit more before we came to a clearing. And that's when things got weird. There was a campsite, but not a fresh one. It looked old, abandoned. The tent was faded, half collapsed, and covered in a layer of pine needles. There were rusted pots and an old cooler lying on its side. Alvarez and I looked at each other. "This isn't our guy's setup," I said. "This stuff's been here a long time." We radioed it in, gave the coordinates, and Jen said they'd swing by on the way back. We decided to poke around, see if there was anything that could help us figure out what happened. Alvarez found a rotted journal near the fire pit, half the pages unreadable. What was legible didn't make much sense. One entry said something like, "He comes at night, but the wind tells me when." Another mentioned the shadows moving wrong. It read more like poetry than anything useful, but it gave me a chill. Whoever had been here last wasn't in the right state of mind. That's when we heard it. A voice, not loud, not yelling, just talking, like someone having a casual conversation somewhere nearby. Alvarez looked at me and mouthed, "Did you hear that?" I nodded. We both stood up and scanned the tree line. Nothing. The voice didn't stop, though. It was low, just above a whisper, and we couldn't make out the words. It sounded close. Too close. I called out, "Search and rescue! If you can hear me, call back." No answer, just more mumbling. We followed the sound about 50 feet into the trees, careful not to lose sight of the clearing. Then it stopped, just cut off, like someone hit a mute button. We stood there, listening. Nothing. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just silence. Alvarez turned to me and said, "I don't like this, man." "Me neither," I replied. "Let's head back to the clearing." But when we turned around, it wasn't there. The clearing, the campsite, gone, like it had never been there to begin with. We stood frozen, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. We retraced our steps, looked for the orange tape. Nothing. No markers, no trail, just trees. I've been doing this job too long to panic, but I won't lie. My chest got tight. Alvarez was visibly shaken. I tried the radio. Static. Not even a crackle. We decided to pick a direction and start walking. After about 20 minutes, we found another trail. This one was familiar, and after a short hike, we spotted Jen and Marcus up ahead. I don't think I've ever been more relieved to see someone. They said they'd been trying to reach us for an hour, asked where we went. I told them the truth, and from the looks on their faces, they didn't think we were making it up. We didn't talk much on the hike back to base. Everyone was quiet, heads down, each of us chewing on our own thoughts. I knew Alvarez was shaken. I was too, even if I didn't show it. We all know the woods can play tricks on you. Time slips, echoes, even light can make things appear where they aren't. But this hadn't felt like a trick. It felt deliberate. And worse, it felt personal. We logged our report and chalked it up as inconclusive. Officially, we told the supervisor that we lost the trail and encountered an abandoned site that didn't match the missing hiker's gear. No mention of the voice, no mention of the clearing vanishing. You learn quickly in this line of work what kinds of details make it into reports and what don't. Not because anyone's hiding the truth, but because sometimes there just aren't words that sound sane on paper. After that call, I took a couple days off. Not because anyone told me to, but because I needed space, some time to clear my head. I stayed close to home, cleaned my gear, reorganized my packs. Normal stuff. It helped, a little. But the silence was different now, like I knew it held something else. I'd sit on my porch and listen to the wind in the trees behind my house, and I swear I could hear that same murmur. Not words, just sound. Like something was trying to get my attention but hadn't quite figured out how. Alvarez called me 3 days later. Said he'd been having nightmares. Said he heard the voice, too, when he was trying to sleep. I asked him what it said. He got quiet for a long time before answering. "I don't know," he said, "but I think it knows me now." That stuck with me. A week passed, then 2. No more calls about the hiker. Case went cold, like a lot of them do eventually. I tried to move on, told myself it was just one of those things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out of those woods. About a month after the search, I got a call from Marcus. He was out on a solo scouting trip for a new training route and had decided to check out the area where we'd lost the trail. He wanted backup. Said something didn't feel right. I agreed to meet him the next morning. When I got there, Marcus was waiting by the trailhead, looking worse for wear. Pale, fidgety, not like him at all. "It's still there," he said before I even stepped out of the truck. "What is?" "That place, the clearing. It's back, but it's different." We hiked in, retracing our original route. Marcus wasn't kidding. The trail was just as we remembered it, right down to the way the trees bent slightly to the east at one junction. We found the orange tape again. Brand new. Tied tight, not weathered. "You put this here?" I asked. He shook his head no. We followed the markers, and sure enough, about a mile in, we reached the clearing. But it wasn't abandoned this time. There was a tent again, same make and color as before, but this one looked clean, new, fresh gear outside it, a small fire pit with smoldering coals. I stepped forward cautiously, called out, "Search and rescue!" "Is anyone here?" No response. We checked the tent. Empty. Everything looked untouched, like whoever set it up had just stepped out and never came back. On a rock near the fire, there was a notebook. Inside, the writing was neat, sparse, mostly dates and times. Then halfway through, a line that made my blood run cold. "The forest moves when you're not watching." I looked at Marcus. He looked at me. Neither of us said anything. We left everything as it was, marked the GPS location, and headed back. Halfway to the trucks, the forest changed again. Same silence, same pressure in the air. We both felt it. Marcus stopped walking. "You hear it?" I nodded. That voice again. Not loud, not angry, just present. This time I didn't call out. I just listened. It said one word. "Closer." And then it was gone. We hiked back to the trucks in near silence, with that voice still echoing in the back of my head. Alvarez was quiet the whole way. I don't think either of us wanted to be the first to bring it up again. Jen and Marcus could tell something had rattled us, but they didn't press. After that, none of us volunteered to go back out there right away. Alvarez went on leave, and after a week or two, he decided not to come back. Said he needed time to think. He ended up transferring out of state a few months later. I don't blame him. It would have been easy to file the whole thing away as just another strange event in a long list of strange events. But something about that day kept gnawing at me. I couldn't stop thinking about that voice, or how the clearing just disappeared, how the forest seemed to shift around us like it didn't want us to leave. I've spent years in the woods, and I trust my instincts. That day they told me something was deeply wrong. A few months later, I was back out there on a training expedition with some new guys. The woods looked the same, ordinary even. We walked for a few hours, marking paths and familiarizing them with the area. Soon enough, we walked through it, the same stretch of forest with the heavy moss, the same damp air. It wasn't marked this time, no orange tape, but I recognized the shape of the trees, the contours of the land. I knew this was it. But the clearing wasn't there, just forest. No collapsed tent, no rusted pots, no remnants of a camp. The forest was completely normal. It's so strange how it can just come and go. I didn't say anything to trainees about it. We just finished up our hike and headed back. Look, I've heard all kinds of stories over the years. I've had other strange calls. People vanishing without a trace. Reports of lights in the woods, of hearing voices or music where there shouldn't be any. We joke about it sometimes. SAR teams always have their weird tales. But this one wasn't a joke. Whatever's out there, I don't think everything means harm. At least not in the way people expect. But it's not something I'll ever fully understand. Some places in the forest feel old, like they remember things, like they watch you. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, they let you know they're watching. I don't tell this story to scare people. I still love the woods. I still spend most of my life in them. But I respect them a little more now, and I don't ignore that feeling when something feels off. There are places in the world that don't make sense, places that don't care if you believe in them or not. This was one of them, and I think if I'd stayed in that clearing for too long, I might not have come back at all. That hiker that never turned up, I still think about him. Still wonder if he heard that voice too, if he followed it, if maybe he stayed in that clearing for longer than we did, and if, somewhere deep in those woods, he's still out there. The Crawler, from The Real Lord of Hell. This story begins on a moderate autumn afternoon with myself and two friends, T and J. I live in a small town in Queensland, Australia, and in my area, we have lots of folklore creatures such as the Quincans and the Mist Marauder. However, the creature in this story resembles neither of these. My encounter starts when TJ and myself had gone for a long bike ride around the town. We were about 13 at the time, and being dumb teenagers, had decided to explore an abandoned shed in the rainforest. So we head down the muddy track to the corrugated steel shed and kicked our way through the door. I am very attracted to the paranormal, and can often feel the supernatural in what I can best explain as a violent shiver. As we climbed over plants and abandoned machinery, I started to shiver, but ignored it. T called out to me and J, "Hey, come look at this," in an excited yet scared tone. We rushed to him and saw a pile of small bones, like mice and birds. We thought maybe an owl or kite had made a home in here. Then, from under a rusty tractor, came a screeching noise, which sounded like a wild pig's enraged squeal and a human shout. We turned around, and there, crawling towards us in such an unnatural, slow way, was a pale figure, easily 7 feet in length. It was white, almost slimy looking, and its eyes were like pits, hypnotic and evil, and its mouth, oh, its mouth was a mess of razor-sharp teeth, definitely not for eating anything other than flesh, bone, and muscle. We booked it out of the shed, hurling over machinery and through undergrowth that had grown from cracks in the floor. We slammed down the doors and pushed a log up against them. Its long claws were scraping against the doors, and as we got onto the bikes and pelted down the track, its scream repeatedly piercing the silent night. And then I heard it say, in a twisted, distorted voice, "Come again soon." And its scream turned to evil laughter. Needless to say, we haven't been anywhere near there since. I will post more of my encounters soon, and until then, sleep with one eye open and a gun close by in case the crawler comes looking for you. Did you hear that? From I's Dream. When I moved here, I heard that it was a great tourist site and beautiful city, but everyone failed to tell me that there was a haunted forest not far from my new house. Now I've mentioned the forest before in my other story, A Whistle in the Woods. Now almost every paranormal thing that's happened to me took place in these woods. Now people say it's haunted by spirits that are buried in the cemetery right next to these woods. Of course, I wasn't alone. It was me, A, G, and S. Now S has lived here longer than all of us, so she told us about the hauntings, and for some dumb reason, I went with her. We walked out there at about 9:30 p.m. with flashlights and A's dog. We walked as deep as we could until I heard something crunching the sticks on the ground. I screamed and turned my flashlight to it and saw a cute white-tailed deer. A and S called me scared, while G started sprinting in a different direction. Of course, we all went to go get her. Once we caught up with her, she claimed she saw a ghost. Luckily, she burst out laughing, which gave away the prank she was trying to pull. We started walking and talking again, but it wasn't long before A claimed she saw a ghost. Now, if I hadn't been there to see it, then I wouldn't have believed myself, but there, we saw a shadowy black thing with a yellowish glow around it. Now I've never seen a ghost, so I was hoping it was the outline of a lantern in the distance. I called out to it, and then it disappeared. Right then and there, we booked it, not looking back until we saw headlights and heard traffic. Unfortunately, S tripped over a branch, but still made it out with us. She came out more scared than all of us. A asked what was wrong, and she told us one of the scariest things I'd ever heard. She claims that she saw a spirit going toward her. She said she screamed and closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the spirit was gone. This was the third time I've been in these woods, and every time I go, I see something or hear something scary. Will I go to these woods again? Probably so. I do know I will never go alone, and I will always have protection on me. Real Life DBD from The Nightmare. This happened a few years ago after we played a certain game that was just released a few days before this. The game in question is called Dead by Daylight, and it's a very fun game still being played much to this day. Here's what happened. My friends and I played Dead by Daylight on my PS4 and took turns playing, laughing at how stupid some of us died in that game as we died from laughter. With potato chips, sodas, and corn chips, we had a very fun night until there was a power outage. "Oh man, why now?" I said somberly. But my friend Seth then said, "Well, if we can't play the game on the PS4, then why not go play it in real life?" "Wow, hey man, I ain't killing people, all right?" Walter shouted in response. But Seth replied, "What are you, nuts? Of course not. We're going to use that sword I got that leaves a paint trail on your body when hit by it." "You forgot the original name of it, didn't you, Seth?" I said, and Seth just smiled. He ran up the stairs of the house to get it, so there I was with 4 of my friends. Walter stood up while saying, "Why don't we do this in the woods at the end of the street?" And then we heard Seth's voice coming from the stairs. "That's a great idea, Walter." Mia then said, "Yeah, dude, that's a pretty awesome idea." To which we all laughed a little. Mia was the only girl in my friend group, but she quickly became one of my best friends. "All right, if even the Missy of the group is up for it, then we go to the woods, weirdos," Seth happily said, shouting the weirdos part, as if it was the New Day from WWE shouting their name. All of us grabbed some dark clothing from my house because it was going to be dark soon. As we arrived at the parking lot at the edge of the woods, I was made the killer, so I had been given the sword, and all my friends but Mia ran into the woods. "So it's basically hide and seek, right?" she said, to which I replied, "Yeah, basically, but if I see you, you can run away from me until I hit you with the sword." I turned my head around to Mia and saw her putting on one of the black hoodies, and she noticed, saying, "Hey, next time wait until I pulled down the hoodie, okay?" I was trying to get my composure, but then Mia kissed me on the cheek, saying right after, "Don't worry, lover boy, I know I only need to blink my eyes." Teasingly, she winked and then ran into the woods. I waited a minute until she left, like we had agreed when we drove to the parking lot. "All right, I'm coming," I shouted, running into the woods, ready to start swinging the sword. I was the fastest of all of us by a mile, so I knew I could easily catch up with them. After a minute of nothing but running, I started looking around carefully, and I saw Akihiko's hoodie pop up from the shrubbery, so I slowly walked around the shrubbery. I slammed the sword against his back, and Akihiko just sighed and said, "Man, I'm always the first to be killed." "Just get to the car, Aki." And he nodded and just went to the car. As I looked around for more of my friends, I then heard giggling, and of course I started looking around where it could come from. After I didn't see anyone, I hung my head and started laughing. "Okay, Mia, very funny," was the first thing I managed to say, and then I saw Walter running. Of course, I ran after him immediately, quickly catching up to him and hitting him with the sword, to which he only said, "Man, you're fast." We bro-hugged, and he went to the car. Now I only needed to catch Seth and Mia, so I started paying even more attention to my surroundings. I knew Seth from kindergarten, and even then, he was the absolute best in hide-and-seek. Not even teachers could find him with a few hours back then, so I was prepared for a long night of searching for him and Mia. I walked for what seemed like hours until I heard the giggling again. "Mia, stop toying with me like that," which immediately was followed by a voice I never heard saying, "Not Mia." In my head, I was like, "What? How?" But then I heard rustling in one of the bushes nearby, which I rushed, and I hit Mia right on the head with the sword, causing me to fall right on top of her. We looked at each other in the eyes, and after a few seconds, she pushed me off of her. Well, you got me, so I think I'll go to the car." And she started walking, looking back at me, biting her lip. I then shouted, "Okay, Seth, it's just you and me now." And then I heard the voice from before saying, "Can I play?" I looked around again and then said, "Who are you?" To which quickly I got a reply, which was, "Death." There was rustling about 4 feet from my left, and I saw Seth standing there, hitting him with the sword. He didn't even react to the hit, so I said, Seth, I hit you." To which he said, "Yeah, I know, but what's with that voice?" "I don't know, man," was all I could muster up to say. But then we heard the voice say, "Follow me." It sounded cheery now, and Seth just tapped me on the shoulder. "Should we follow it?" To which I replied, "Maybe, I don't know." We ended up following the voice that guided us somewhere deeper in the woods. Then the voice said, "Hide and seek, your turn." Seth and I were standing in front of a wooden house that had definitely seen better days. The door was, after all, hanging on one hinge, but Seth and I went in anyway. There was moss growing on the walls, doors on the floor, rodents walking around, and just a smell that wasn't right. "Bro, something just ain't right, man," I said to Seth when we were just heading into one of the rooms on the right, until we then heard, Hi, I'm not there," Seth just quickly shouted, "Do you want us to find you or something?" Which was immediately answered with, "Yes, find me." I put on my thinking cap, and after a few seconds I said, "Are you in this house?" Seth and I waited for an answer, and when I thought we weren't going to get one, the voice said, "I'm close." We went out of the room and started walking into the living room. The room was huge, but before we ended admiring the huge size of the room, we heard, "Found me." Seth and I looked at each other, and I said, Where are you?" "Right in front of you, haha," was what we heard right after, and we looked around frantically. Suddenly, both Seth and I stopped, and I saw a girl in the middle of the room. "Hey Seth, you see her as well, right?" To which Seth said, "Yeah, I see her." It was a girl who looked about 12 or 13 with long black hair. I swear I saw her mouth turn into a devilish grin, and it was then I put my hand on Seth's shoulder and said, "We need to get out of here, man." I saw in the corner of my eye Seth nodded, but then the eyes of the girl started glowing. Her mouth then started to get wider and wider, to a point it wasn't normal for a human to lower their jaw lower. Then the scream came, and Seth and I just started to run. All the time we were in that house, we heard the scream. After a time of non-stop running, we arrived at the car in the parking lot. Mia looked at me and said, "Are you okay, lover boy?" Seth quickly said, "We need to go right now." And we all got in the car and gunned it towards my house. We arrived at my house, pretty much all of us getting ready for bed, and I was standing in front of the stairs when Mia said, "You're okay, right?" Mia put her arms around my waist from behind me and put her head on my shoulder. "I think I'm fine," I told her, to which she said in my ear, "Just in case, I'll sleep next to you tonight." Mia fell asleep pretty quickly, but I just couldn't get the sight of that girl in the middle of that room out of my mind. Luckily, I fell asleep at some point and woke up with Mia being awake, looking at me. The first thing she said was, "Who's the little girl you talked about in your sleep?" "I don't know what you mean, Mia," to which Mia, clearly worried, said, "You said in your sleep, 'Get out of the room, little girl.' What did you mean by that?" We both went to the kitchen, and we forgot about it for that moment. None of us ever went back to those woods, to my knowledge, and I never looked up to that house. But all I know, it was the scariest thing I had ever experienced. My old diary confirms a terrifying memory. From No Name Maddox. I hope this experience fits in here. It was my first time encountering otherworldly entities or spirits. I recall this night so clearly, or so I thought. I'm currently reading through all my old diaries, ages 11 to 22, and came across the night in question. It was in the middle of an entry. For a second, I didn't even know I was reading the same event that touched me so deeply. For context, when I was 12, my mom couldn't find a sitter for a late-night meeting, so I had to go with her, along with my younger brother, B, and a friend, Mac. We had to keep ourselves entertained somehow in a church at night. Naturally, there's a cemetery in the back we had to fool around in. My entry reads, "Me, Mac, and B went into the cemetery in the dark." I screamed and hid behind a gravestone to scare B. Then B taught us a ritual that brings the spirits out. You stand on a gravestone and say, "May raise" 10 times. I stood on about 6 stones at different times and did it. Then I was standing on one, and Mac and B were facing me. Mac saw something walk towards us and then run. I saw a black something that was hunched over going behind a tree. B saw what I saw. Then we were up near the church more, and I was staring at one that was right next to a tree. I stared at it for a long time, and it was shaking a lot, and fast. Its head moved the most. Then it waved for me to go over there. I'm not crazy. Mac even saw it too. To clear things up, Mac saw something walk towards us and then run. I am standing on a stone, facing B, Mac, the church, and a wooded area to the right of it, where I saw the something. Mac said she saw a tall person wearing a robe standing behind a stone in the back of the cemetery. While she was trying to make out what she was seeing, it appeared a few rows closer. She screams and pulls me off the grave. Fallen on my stomach, I looked up to see her and B running toward the church's spotlights, so I followed. I was computing what I thought was a hunched, robed person walking behind a tree within the woods next to the church. At the same time, they were absorbed in the figure behind me. Our descriptions of the two different things we saw were oddly similar, though theirs sounded tall, around 7 feet, and mine was short, around 5 feet. I also want to point out that I completely forgot about the part where we stood under the light and stared at one of them next to a tree. All three of us stood there in silence for at least 5 minutes. I remember watching its head rotating around the shoulders like a pinwheel, so fast it was blurry. Following this experience, I don't recall feeling anything about it. Even my diary entry quickly moves on to another topic. It wasn't until a couple of years later that I experienced a similar entity in a cemetery while using a Ouija board with a friend. I felt a dreadful, familiar feeling, one that made me recall the night at the church. On the outside, my skin felt sweaty, like I suddenly got the flu. But on the inside, I'm a dark, hollow carcass, bound to the savageries of the universe. Anyway, I just wanted to share this experience, especially since I found this old diary entry. The Eyes in the Darkness, from Anonymous. I know this story sounds strange. Trust me, I wouldn't go to the trouble of writing all this if it hadn't genuinely scared me. Some people might think it's made up, but I promise it's not. This happened on a weekend evening, just around 6:30 p.m. My friend, who I'll call Jazz, was over at my house. We were out back, tossing a ball around with my dog, Oscar, enjoying the cold evening air. Now, my house sits on a bit of a hill. The backyard slopes down into a patch of woods. Not huge, but big enough to get lost in if you weren't careful. Oscar kept stopping when he got near the side of the house, close to where the woods started. At first, we thought he was just distracted. Dogs do that, but he kept staring into the same spot, ears perked up, tail stiff, body tense. It wasn't like him at all. I called Jazz over and asked her if she saw anything. She didn't. Nothing looked out of place from where we stood. Still, I didn't feel great about it, so I called Oscar inside. Then, for whatever reason, I decided to walk down the hill and get a better look. It wasn't too steep, and our driveway wraps around the house, so it was easy enough to make our way down. Jazz followed me at first, but she stopped short once we got close to the trees. That's when we heard footsteps. Just one set, coming from a little ahead of us. It wasn't loud. Actually, it was light. Too light to be an adult or something heavy. We started guessing what kind of animal it could be. Jazz said maybe a coyote, but then shook her head. No, it didn't sound like one. And possums? They'd be asleep this time of night, tucked into whatever shelter they'd made. I don't know what made me suggest it, but I told Jazz we should try scaring it off. We figured maybe we could toss a rock in its direction. Not to hit anything, just to spook it. I threw first and missed the tree line by just a foot or so. Jazz managed to get hers just past it. That's when we heard another set of footsteps to our front left. I felt uneasy, grabbed Jazz's arm and took a step back. As we did, a third set of footsteps came from our left. That did it for me. Something about hearing multiple sources made me feel like we were being surrounded. I scanned the trees again and caught a quick flash of light, low to the ground, almost like a blink of lightning. But no thunder followed. Just this fast, intense burst. Jazz said she saw something too. She called it an orb, like a glowing ball of light. She said it left a faint trail behind it as it moved, flickering slightly like a sparkler being twirled. I didn't see it that clearly. All I know is the moment she mentioned it, my head started to ache. A sharp, localized pain right where we'd been standing. It was like something invisible had placed its hand on the side of my skull and squeezed. We decided to go back inside. Sitting on the couch, we tried to laugh it off, but neither of us really could. Jazz said she also had a headache, in the same spot I did. She pointed toward the woods and said it felt like the pain was coming from that direction. I asked if she wanted to go back out, maybe just check to see if we could smell something strange or spot whatever it was. She agreed. I grabbed my baseball bat, just in case. And here's an important detail. I was fully dressed. Jacket, jeans, gloves with the fingertips cut off. Only my face, fingers, and toes were exposed. Still, as we stepped outside again, both Jazz and I started itching. All over, like ants crawling across our skin. My arms, back, legs, everything itched like I was being bitten by invisible bugs. Jazz said the same thing. And again, I remind you, I was fully clothed. This time, Jazz pointed out 2 more of those glowing orbs. She said they looked like eyes watching us. I kept looking but never quite saw them myself. My attention kept getting pulled to our left, like something was standing just beyond my line of sight, teasing the edge of my vision. Jazz said her side started to hurt, badly, like something was pulling at her skin. The itching intensified for both of us, and I decided enough was enough. We headed back inside and holed up in my room. I was rattled, definitely, but Jazz was worse off. She said it felt like something was biting her, slow and deep, right into her side. This all started around 7:15 p.m. We stayed inside until almost 9:30 p.m. I told another friend what was happening, mostly just to feel like I wasn't losing my mind. At around 10 o'clock, we were hanging out in the living room. The only light outside was from a nearby street lamp, one I'd always felt weirdly comforted by. Jazz went to the window and froze. Friday, she said. That's the nickname she used for me. I think I might have messed up. The eyes turned red, and then they disappeared. I panicked. I knew from all the stories and shows I'd consumed over the years. Red meant anger. It meant danger. Why would you look at it again? I asked, trying not to raise my voice. Didn't you look at it more than once? She nodded. I looked when we came back in, and again when I got a drink. I think that was the 5th time. That's when I started spiraling. My back was to the wall, right by the window. I didn't want to move, but I also didn't want to stay. We both agreed to go back to my room, figuring it might be safer. But before I made it to the hallway, I heard it, tapping, then growling. It didn't sound like any animal. It was guttural, almost human, but distorted, like it wanted us to think it was human. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I grabbed Jazz and we ran to the room, shutting the door behind us. The growling followed. So did the tapping. My room is on the side of the house that faces the woods, which didn't make me feel any better. Jazz went back to scrolling on her phone. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the curtain covering my window. That's when I saw it. There was no breeze, no fan. The curtain shouldn't have moved, but it did. And through it, just for a second, I saw the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. A half-decayed face, deathly pale, staring in at me with 2 red eyes. The smile was wide, wrong. It looked more like a crack in its face than a human mouth. I yelped and fell off the bed. Jazz looked at me like I was crazy. "What did you see?" she asked. I couldn't speak, just pointed at the window, still gasping for breath. For the rest of the night, whatever it was, didn't stop. It growled, knocked, and scratched. Worst of all, it spoke. Jazz, come out. You'll learn so much if you just come out." The voice was so inviting, like it was trying to trick us into opening the door. Jazz almost listened. She stood near the door once or twice. I had to keep talking her down. "Don't do it. It's not safe," I whispered, tears in my eyes. It kept going until around 4:40 in the morning. Then it just stopped. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed in the room, shaking, waiting for sunrise. I haven't seen the red eyes or that face again, but I've heard my name in the woods more than once. When I walk to the bus stop, when I take Oscar out late at night, I know it's still out there, and I know it remembers me. And sometimes late at night, I wonder what would have happened if Jazz had opened that door, or if I had looked a second longer at that face in the window. I wonder how close it really was, and why it chose us. That night changed something in me. I don't feel safe in the woods anymore. I used to love sitting on the back deck, listening to the wind move through the trees. Now every creak or rustle puts me on edge. I haven't told anyone else. Not my parents, not even my other friends. It sounds insane when I say it out loud. But it happened. Sometimes I think I still feel that itching. Not as bad as it was that night, but faint, like a memory my skin hasn't forgotten. Jazz moved away a few months after that. She said it was unrelated. Part of me wonders if she was just trying to put distance between herself and whatever that thing was. I don't blame her. I still live here. And I still hear things. Just last week, Oscar wouldn't stop barking toward the woods. I didn't check. I couldn't. Whatever it wasn't done with us. Not yet. I don't know what it was, but I know it wasn't human. Be careful where you look. And if you see red eyes in the woods, don't look again. I still think about that night more often than I like to admit. Sometimes I sit up late, just scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, but that feeling comes back. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck. And I know if I looked out the window just once, I might see it again. I don't want to. But part of me always wonders if it's still watching, just waiting for another chance. I don't know if it'll ever come back for real, or if it just wanted to be seen that one time. Maybe it was warning us, or maybe it was just playing a game. All I know is we lost something that night, some kind of innocence, some kind of peace. We saw something we weren't meant to, and it saw us back. So if you ever see something glowing in the woods, don't follow it. Don't even look. Just turn around and walk away. I wish we had. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at Dark Prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again. Every culture seems to have its own shape-shifting boogeyman, and tonight you will learn that Australia is no exception. Because of course it's not. Everything there already wants to eat you or poison you. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and today I've got an assortment of terrifying true stories of the unknown featuring skinwalkers, possible demons, and a particular monster who may not have a face, but he sure does rock a cowboy hat. Stay tuned. Remember, you can send me your scary stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org so I can narrate them on the show. And follow, rate, and/or review Unexplained Encounters on your favorite podcast app, especially Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you. Hit that like button, turn out the lights, and grab a snack. Let's begin. The Thing on the Farm. From Don't Ask Ouse 1. I'm a long-time listener, but this is my first time posting. I've been thinking about it for a while because I have a lot of stories, and I've decided that today I'm going to share one of them. I'm always happy to share more, especially because we still see the beast I'm about to talk about, so let me know if you'd like to hear more. For context, I live on one of the bigger farms in Australia. It's a solid 2-day ride to the closest town, and even that barely has anything. Our farm is massive. We raise cattle and sheep, grow wheat, and we have a few small nature reserves and even an old abandoned, possibly haunted, church. We also have a few smaller houses on the property in case we need to stay somewhere overnight or can't make it to what we call the big house. The big house is our main home, and around it we have a horse barn, a shearing shed, a small junkyard, and even a motorbike track we built among some trees. For privacy's sake, I'll refer to my siblings as L, the oldest brother, myself, a girl I'll call E, F, my younger brother, and M, the youngest sister. Our first encounter with this thing was about a year ago in early January. It was late, and the day had finally started to cool off after the scorcher of a day we just had. Dad and I were out finishing our last job for the day. It was about 9 p.m. We were bringing in some sheep from one of the back paddocks to the shearing shed so the shearers could get started at first light. I was on my horse named Luna, and Dad was in his ute. At first, everything was pretty normal. The sheep were down by the stream that runs through that particular field and into the woods nearby. They moved easily, calm and cooperative, with an occasional bleat as we guided them. Everything was peaceful. But as we got closer to the paddock where we were planning to leave them for the night, the sheep suddenly started acting erratic, wandering off, bunching up, clearly trying to avoid entering the paddock. I must have been the only one who noticed, because the next thing I heard through my radio was my dad saying, "Hey, E, can you go up ahead and see what's spooking them?" I said sure, and nudged Luna forward, scanning the horizon for anything out of place. As I moved ahead, I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, just the rolling fields and the trees at the end of the paddock, where we were supposed to be taking the sheep. Everything looked normal. But as I got closer to the front of the flock, I felt a slight change in the temperature. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the chill of the night settling in. But then, as I crossed into the paddock, Luna started to tense up. Her ears were flicking and she kept tossing her head, clear signs that something was off. Still, I couldn't see anything strange. I figured maybe she was just picking up on a storm in the distance. We do get dry lightning out here pretty often, so that wouldn't be unusual. I radioed back to Dad, saying, "There's nothing here. I'm not sure why they're acting funny." He replied, "Righto, come back around and help me push them forward a little harder." So I nudged Luna away from the paddock. She was more than happy to leave, and we rode around behind the sheep to help guide them in. After a bit of a struggle, we finally got the sheep into the field. They were stubborn, clearly not wanting to go in, but after a while, we managed to push them through. We were just about to head back to the big house when suddenly a loud commotion broke out behind us. The sheep were going crazy, panicked, distressed, running around like they were being chased. It didn't make sense. All of our work dogs were back at the main house, and there was nothing else that we knew of. Dad and I exchanged a glance, and we decided to go and check it out. By the time we got to them, the entire flock had pushed itself into the far corner of the paddock, right up against the fence that bordered the woods. It was like something herded them there, but they also knew not to get too close to the trees. It felt wrong. The energy completely changed. Then I heard Dad's voice come through the radio. "Can you hop off Luna? She won't fit through there. Go around the back and push them out," he said. That meant I'd have to get in between the sheep, the fence, and those dark woods. I didn't want to. Every part of me was screaming that something was really wrong. Really, really wrong. But I forced myself to answer, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, sure thing." But my hands were shaking, and my stomach dropped as I dismounted. Luna didn't like it either. She kept tossing her head and stepping away, like she wanted to be no part of what's over there. Still, I started moving. I pushed through the tightly packed sheep, trying to make my way to the back. That's when I heard it, a growl, a low and guttural growl. It rolled out from just beyond the fence, deep in the trees. Then came the sound of something ripping meat and something big moving around. I froze. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. Then I felt it. Eyes on me, watching. Then I heard the growl again, louder this time. It rattled through me and hit something inside. My instincts were on fire. My body wanted to run, but for some stupid reason, I turned around. The first thing I saw was a sheep lying on its side, dead. And then something behind it moved. A long black tail swayed into view, followed by the hindquarters of what looked like a massive black cat. But then it shifted, and what should have been its front paws rose up, planting on the body of the dead sheep. But they were not paws. They were hands. Like human hands, but not fully human. They had long, blood-covered fingers, but they were sharpened like claws. And then it looked at me. It lifted its head slowly and locked eyes with me. Its face was almost human, just enough to be familiar. But all the wrong pieces were in the wrong places. Its ears were pointed and pulled back. Its nose and mouth jutted into a short, narrow snout. Then it bared its teeth, long, sharp, and yellowed. That's when something inside me snapped. I screamed. Adrenaline slammed into my body. I turned and ran. I didn't think. I just ran faster than I ever have in my life, crashing through sheep and sprinting across the field. Dad must have heard me scream because he slammed right into me. Dad didn't even have to ask what I'd seen. He saw it written all over my face. The fear, the panic. I couldn't even get the words out. I was shaking so hard. He grabbed my shoulders, looking me dead in the eyes, and told me, "Go home now." I didn't argue. I got back on Luna, who was more than ready to leave, and I rode hard, straight back to the big house. I didn't look back once. I couldn't. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. Every tree looked like it was hiding something. When Dad finally came back, about an hour or so later, he didn't say anything, didn't even approach me. He just walked straight into his office, shut the door, and stayed in there for the rest of the night. I know that room. It's where we keep the old station books, the work diaries and journals passed down through generations of our family. Everything that's ever happened on this farm is in those pages. Weather records, calving notes, crop yields, and the weird stuff. The stuff people don't talk about. I remember peeking down the hallway and seeing the light still on under his door hours later. He was digging, looking for something, and whatever it was, he knew, or at least he suspected. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the first encounter we had with the beast. Now, we've had plenty of encounters with that beast, but the next one we had after that was sometime in early autumn, just after the last of the hot days. The sky had started turning that hazy gold it gets out here, and the flies were finally giving us a break. It had been a long day of fencing and checking on water lines, and just before sunset, Dad asked if we could all ride out together to check the big tank past the western tree line, the one near the back reserve. It was me, L, F, and M. We each saddled up, me on Luna, of course. L was riding his usual gelding. F was bouncing with excitement on the quad bike, and M was tucked up behind him holding tight. It was the kind of evening that felt almost peaceful. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and the cicadas were buzzing. I remember thinking it felt too calm, like the land was holding its breath. When we got out to the tank, everything seemed okay at first. The cattle had moved off, and the paddock was quiet. Too quiet. No bird song, no wind, just that still, eerie silence that makes your skin itch. L hopped off to check the tank's valve, while F messed around, tossing rocks at a fence post. M stayed close to him. She doesn't like being near the bush line when it gets late, and neither do I. There's something about the trees out there that feels wrong once the sun starts going down. I was scanning the edge of the woods while we waited, and then we noticed it. There was a shape, low to the ground, black, just barely visible between the trees, crouched near the base of an old, dead log. I blinked, thinking maybe it was just a shadow or an old tree stump. But then it moved. No sound, no crunch of leaves, just a slow, creeping shift, like something crawling forward. I whispered, "L, do you see that?" He stood up, squinting toward where I pointed. "Yeah, that's not a kangaroo." Then M spoke up, quiet, almost shaking. "It's looking at us." And then it stood up. Whatever it was, it rose up on two legs, tall, wrong, and fast. The body was lean like a cat, but stretched, almost elongated. The black fur shimmered slightly in the last bit of daylight. Its arms were too long, and even from that distance, I could see the glint of something sharp. Claws, I think, at the ends of its hands. Its face, it was hidden by the shadows at first, but then it stepped forward just enough for the light to catch its eyes. They were yellow, reflective, and fixed on us. We froze. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even F went dead quiet. Then it took a step forward, smooth and calculated. That's when L shouted, "Back on your bikes! Go!" We scrambled. I barely got Luna turned before she reared slightly, clearly panicked. L jumped into the saddle beside me, yelling at F to go as the quad sputtered to life. M was screaming now, clinging to F's back as he peeled away down the paddock. I looked back only once. It was still standing at the edge of the trees, watching us leave. Not chasing, just watching. Now, that was the first two encounters we had, and I'm going to leave it here for today. But I'm more than happy to tell you more or talk about the church we have on the property. Again, let me know. A Ghost in the Red Church. From Anonymous Cat. I've started listening to your channel, and I became a fan ever since. I love listening to scary stories even during work time. When I realized I could submit my experience on the website, I decided I wanted to share my experience that has become one of my most memorable, memories of my life. This happened when I was quite young, about 13 years old. So bear with me for a bit, as it's been more than a decade since that happened. During school vacation, my family and I headed towards a very nice place, and since I can't really include the place's real name, I'll describe it as best I can. This city is one of the top historical sites in my country. It's known for its rich cultural tapestry, influenced by Portuguese, Dutch, and British colonial eras. We've been there a lot of times in the past, and at the age of 13, my family made a very last visit to the city, which I had no idea would become one of the most memorable visits of my life. That day, we decided to take a walk around one of the tourist spots, the Red Square. The Red Square is a historical square in the Old Town area, where there are many, many Dutch-inspired red buildings. We took a walk around as the square was filled with the bustling noises of the vendors selling their toys and bubble wands for the kids, the smell of delicious street food, and tourists busy taking pictures of themselves and the red buildings. At the time, I was quite a mischievous kid. I tended to separate from my family and wander off without telling them. This time was no exception either. You see, a building caught my attention. It was a red church. I don't know much about architecture and stuff like that, but it is indeed a beautiful building, and I just couldn't take my eyes off of it. So much so that I had no idea that I'd gotten separated from my family again. I stood there, silently admiring this church, until something caught my eye. There at the very front entrance of the church was a woman. Well, I think she's a woman at the time. She had very long black hair, but I couldn't see her face, because her face was covered by that hair. Which was strange enough as it is, but my 13-year-old brain didn't think much of it. She was wearing a pure white dress with long sleeves, and at the time all I thought was, is she not hot in that thick dress in such hot weather? People were passing by the church entrance once in a while, but strangely enough nobody seemed to notice her but me. I kept staring, and I didn't know if she was staring back at me, but I could definitely feel a chill gaze beneath her hair. Then suddenly I felt a tap on my shoulder. I had been so focused on staring at the woman that I jumped a bit from the interruption. I turned around to see my brother standing behind me. He told me that he and my parents were looking for me, asking why I'd run off this time. I didn't answer. I simply pointed at the red church. "Did you see that woman?" I asked. My brother, confused, looked at the red church where I was pointing and shook his head. "What woman?" I froze, and when I looked back at the church, the woman was gone. I didn't know if that woman was an actual ghost or just a woman who likes to dress up, since quite a few locals are dressing in historical costumes. Some even had pythons wrapped around their necks, so tourists could take pictures of them for money. But I did not look back at the church. I dragged my brother back to where my parents were waiting for me. That night, as we returned to our hotel, I had a strange dream. It's been years since then, but I could still vaguely remember that I was dreaming about a woman. The very same woman I saw at the red church. She still had long black hair covering her face, wearing a thick white dress with long sleeves. She did nothing but stand a few feet away from me, staring at me beneath her hair, and I stared back. I couldn't remember anything else, other than she and I staring at each other, as if we were having a staring competition. The next day, when we went back to the square to buy some snacks to bring them back home, I didn't see the woman at the red church again. However, as we stayed for another night at our hotel, I dreamt of her again. But this time, I couldn't help but notice she was standing closer to me than from the previous dream, almost just an arm's length away from me, and she could easily touch my shoulder if she raised her hand. That freaked me out a little, but I couldn't wake up no matter how hard I tried until the next morning. Strangely, but fortunately enough, nothing happened to me other than we stared at each other again. Thankfully, we left on the third day of our vacation, and we never returned to that city. Nor did I have dreams about her again after leaving. Because of that, I just brushed it off as nothing but a nightmare created by my imagination. However, a few months later, my uncle and his family came to visit from another country. He's a funny and kind guy who always loves to cook. He just immensely enjoys it. Before I get to his part of the story, I need to tell you a little bit about my uncle. My mother once told me that my uncle can actually see ghosts. When he was a kid, he saw them a few times, but after growing up, becoming a Christian like my family, and marrying a kind woman who is now my aunt, he rarely saw them again. Getting back to the story. My uncle and his family went to the same city with the Red Square tourist spot that I visited a few months ago, wanting to tour around the entire city and try out some popular restaurants there. A few days later, when he and his family came back to my house from their trip, I couldn't help but notice that he looked a bit pale. He looked kind of on edge and didn't even talk to me. He just went back to the guest room and locked himself in until the next day, when he and his family returned to his country. After a while, when my family and I visited my uncle's country for a vacation, we stayed at my grandparents' house. I asked my aunt when she came visiting, "A few months ago, when you and your family returned from the city, why was Uncle acting so weird?" My aunt, who loves to smile all the time, suddenly didn't smile anymore. She looked worried. Then she whispered to me, "Your uncle told me that he saw a woman at the red church, and he got spooked ever since. He kept having nightmares about her until the day we left the city." That was when I knew that the woman I saw was not just a figment of my imagination. My uncle saw her too, and I am so glad I never returned to that place ever again. I got chased by a skinwalker in the hollers of Kentucky. From Wee Viking. I was a 17-year-old boy when this happened to me. I'm 22 now, and I've since moved far away. I lived in the hollers of Somerset, Kentucky. It was a weekend when school was starting back again, and it was nice and cool outside. I'd gotten a text from my friend, DJ, saying that he, Marshall, and Amanda wanted to hang out tonight. I said sure, and I told them I'd bring some booze with me. I opened my window and took my bag, tossing it out. I tried to be careful to not make too much noise as I snuck out. Once safely outside, I put my bag on and began to walk down the driveway to go hang out with some friends from school. I had a long walk ahead of myself. It was about a 3 to 4 mile walk to go play some basketball with them. I was tired already from going down and up hills and carrying a bag on my back with booze in it, which I'd stolen to drink with my friends. But I still played some basketball with them when I got there anyway. After we got done and I was heading back home, I was listening to the nature around me. But when I was going up the road leading to the woods that surrounded me on both sides, I smelled something like rotten flesh, and something that felt like it was choking the breath out of me. I just kept on walking, but a little bit faster. I didn't realize until I got all the way to the top of the road that it was quiet, too quiet. I was kind of scared at this moment, because I know we have bears and mountain lions where I lived. I just took my phone out to listen to some spiritual music to empower me not to stop, no matter what. Then I heard something that sounded like a hurt animal. I turned on my flashlight, and I saw a shadow moving in the woodline. What I did next, I wished I hadn't done. I started to run because I felt like something was watching me from the woods. I looked behind me, and I saw it. Its arms were like gorilla arms but longer, with 4-inch claws for nails. Its head looked like a deer, but with sharp teeth and skin falling off its face. It was running at me. It could reach out and grab me if it wanted to. I thought of a plan to keep it away from me. I took my bag off and grabbed one of the bottles and a rag that I had, and I made a Molotov cocktail while running. I took my bag, threw it back on my back, and took my lighter out of my pocket, nearly dropping it. I then lit the rag, and I threw the Molotov at the thing. It didn't like that at all. It took off and jumped off the bridge that was behind me as I kept running and running until I made it home. I made it back okay. Before heading in, I stopped to catch my breath, listening to the nature around me. I was so happy to hear crickets and frogs and the owls again, but the best part was that horrible smell was now gone. The next morning I looked at my bag. It had been cut open like someone took a knife to it. I never snuck out again, because I know if I did, I wouldn't be here to tell the story. If you ever go out for a walk at night in the hollers of Kentucky, just remember that thing could be there, and it will catch up to you no matter how fast you can run. A weird migraine from Canadian Viking. I've been listening to your channel for a year now. I always love hearing the real stories from other people. Many times they give me goosebumps, and it's become my ritual before going to bed. Now, I'm a French Canadian from Quebec, living in a small town along the lower St. Lawrence River. I'm a dad of 3 kids with a wife, a normal job, and a pretty quiet life. I can't lie, I had a hard past and was very neglected by my parents when I was young. There were lots of alcohol-fueled disputes, all the chaos of a dysfunctional family. So mental health problems and drugs were issues for me in my early 20s. For reference, I'm now 33. With an iron will and a good life, I've come through it all. When this event happened, my mental health was solid and I had not touched drugs in a while. So maybe that event came from my PTSD. Or maybe it was supernatural. Then again, it could be a very weird dream. But the dream explanation seems very unlikely to me, because I've never had dreams like that in my entire life. So let's start the story. Since I was a kid, I've had a very long history of migraines and headaches. I remember migraines starting at 6 years old. When I have a migraine attack, it can last 24 hours sometimes, like having a knife permanently stuck in my head, and there's nothing I can do to cure it. Even Advil or Tylenol doesn't work sometimes. But migraines like that aren't common in my story. They happen very rarely, like 1 or 2 times max since I was a child. Now, I've never hallucinated or had weird dreams during a migraine, even when my mental health wasn't great. I never experienced hallucinations. The only hallucinations I've ever had were when I was doing drugs at 20. So I don't think drugs were the cause of this event. One day in September 2023, one of these migraines hit really hard. It started at 7 p.m., so I told my wife I was going to bed. I closed all the lights and sounds because my head hurt like my skull was going to split open. Surprisingly, I fell asleep very fast, but the worst of the migraine hadn't even started yet. I woke up at 2 a.m. My wife was asleep beside me, and the pain in my head at that moment was indescribable. So I decided to get up, take an Advil, even though I knew from past migraines it wasn't going to work very well. I grabbed a bag of ice and lay down on the couch. I told myself, if the headache doesn't ease up after this, I'm going to the emergency room. I closed my eyes, And that's when things got very confusing. When I opened my eyes, I was in my room, but I'd been on the couch upstairs when I closed my eyes. My wife was sleeping in the same position she'd been in when I went upstairs for the meds. At that time, my youngest child was 6 months old, and his bassinet was in the same room as us. But the bassinet wasn't there. I thought to myself, what the heck? This can't be real. I must be in a dream or something. So I went upstairs only to find myself sleeping on the couch. At that moment, I knew something really weird was happening to me. Then I heard something downstairs. It was very dark, but I could still see somewhat. I went downstairs to my room, where my wife was still sleeping, where the baby's bassinet should have been. But now there was an open door instead. I heard a woman scream then, "Shut that door, you're making too much noise!" And she slammed the door very hard from far away. I'm a very curious person in general. I question everything, and I could not rationalize why the bassinet was now a door. So I did what any curious person would do. I opened the door, and I went inside. The door led me outside my house. It was the same normal yard, but very dark and with a thick fog. It sounds generic, but it was just like the Insidious movie. The yard light was still on, but the light was dimmer than normal, and the fog was thick. I was very confused by this kind of experience. Looking around the yard, I saw some transparent, dark purple silhouettes. Each one was alone, about 10 feet apart from the others, and they weren't moving. The feeling I got when I saw them was that these people seemed very, very sad. I approached one of these weird silhouettes, and even before I could open my mouth to ask where I was, it started to scream at me.
"Get out of me! Get out! Get out!"
So I backed up, and it just continued standing there, alone and unmoving. I walked around my house, and those silhouettes were everywhere in the yard and driveway, not moving, standing in the thick fog. When I made a complete loop around the house, I found a girl, a young girl, around 14 or 15 years old. She had a red polar fleece, jeans, and was very colorful compared to the other silhouettes I'd seen. So I approached her, hoping to talk and ask what this place was, and who these people around my house were. I said, "Hello, young girl." She didn't respond, so I asked, "Can you tell me who these people are?" Still, she didn't respond. I asked, "Are these people dead?" Finally, she said something. "Yes, those people are dead, and I'm here to warn you." I opened my eyes then, and I was back on the couch, lying down. I sat up. It was exactly 3 a.m. I looked outside. Everything was normal. Then I went downstairs to my room. Everything looked fine. My wife was still sleeping, my baby was sleeping in his bassinet, and my other 2 kids were asleep in their beds. My headache was still there, but much less intense than before I fell asleep. I told my wife about the event. She thinks it's something supernatural, because she believes in that kind of stuff. She even mentioned astral projection. I've heard about that subject in the past, but I've never really believed in that kind of esoteric practice, and I've never even tried it. But even today, I don't know what to think about this experience. I'm Christian. I read the Bible, and the Bible is very clear about that kind of magic. Don't get tainted by it. So I've never searched more about it, and continue to keep my faith in Jesus. Stories from the house I grew up in. From J.M. Reevely. I wanted to share some stories about the house in which I grew up. These stories all happened in the 90s and early 2000s. I live in southeast Tennessee. The first story I want to share is what my family calls the heavy footsteps story. Growing up, we had a den area in our unfinished basement. We had an old couch, a TV, and that's where we had our new gateway computer. One day, my mom, 2 brothers, sister, and I were all downstairs. Us kids were watching TV, and my mom was on the computer. As we were sitting there, we started to hear loud footsteps, like someone wearing work boots, walking down the hall upstairs. The hallway runs the length of the house. On one end are the bedrooms, and the other is the kitchen. My dad worked out of town on power lines, so my mom thought he had gotten home early that week. She called him on his cell phone and said, "I didn't know you were coming home early." He responded, saying, "Honey, I'm in..." I don't remember exactly where he was, but it was a few hours away. She told him there were footsteps upstairs. This had all happened in just a few seconds as the footsteps were going down the hall. I grabbed a baseball bat to head up the stairs to see who it was, because my mom told me to go check. I was only 8 years old or so at the time. The door to the basement is in the kitchen, and the footsteps were coming from the other end of the house to the kitchen. By the time I got to the top of the stairs, whoever or whatever it was should have been right at the door, based on the footsteps. I cracked open the door, but I didn't see anything. I opened the door completely then, and no one was around. We still don't know who or what it was. The next story happened in the basement. My younger brother, who was about 3 years old at the time, was in the basement watching TV again. He came upstairs asking who was calling for Chris. My mom said nobody was calling for Chris. Nobody in our family is even named Chris. He went back downstairs to watch TV again. Before long, he came back up, asking once more who was calling for Chris. At this point, my mom goes to my sister's room to ask her and my cousin if they were playing a trick on him. They said no. They had been in her room the whole time. She also came and asked me the same thing. I'd also been in my room. My mom didn't think much of it. She was on the phone with my dad later, who was working out of town again, and told him what happened. He said, "Wait, did you say Chris?" And Mom replied, "Yeah, why?" He then went on to tell her that the older couple who had lived in the house before us, before they died, had a grandson named Chris. This really freaked her out. The next story happened upstairs. The way my sisters' and parents' rooms were positioned, their closets were back to back. My sister got up one night, told my mom someone was in her closet. My mom thought she was just being a paranoid 5-year-old, so she told her to just go back to bed. A few minutes later, my sister came back, telling our mom again someone was in her closet. This time, my mom went back to my sister's room with her and showed her that no one was there, then put her back in bed. A few minutes after that, my sister got up again, saying there really was someone in there. At this point, my mom was about to go to bed, so she told my sister that she could just sleep with her instead. A while later, they were about to head to my mom's room. My mom's bedroom light was on, and she swears she saw a shadow of someone or something in the hall moving around. It was coming from her room. She yelled at my brothers and told them they needed to go to bed. They responded, saying they were already in bed. She opened their door and they were in their bunk bed. She then yelled and told me to go to bed, but I was also in my room at the time. She was starting to get creeped out, so she made up a story, telling us, "Kids, I think we left some groceries in the van. Come help me get them." She rushed us out the door to the van. My papa came over with his revolver and went through the house checking if anybody was there. But there was nobody. The next story, I was the only one involved. I woke up one night to go to the bathroom. As I was leaving the bathroom, I looked down the hall. and I saw these red, glowing eyes staring at me. My brother's room was across the hall from the bathroom, so I ran in there. I looked at the window, and the same red, glowing eyes were now staring at me through the window. I then ran back to my room, hiding under the blanket for the remainder of the night, unable to sleep. The last story also happened to me. One evening after it had gotten dark, my mom asked me to go out to the van to get something. As I'm out there, I felt like something was watching me. So I got in the van, closed the door, and looked around in the dark. I didn't notice anything, so I grabbed what my mom had asked me to get and went to get out. As I'm about to shut the sliding door, I still feel like something is watching me. But then I heard something. I turned around and looked out into the backyard. There I saw a huge black mass moving towards me, or rather running at me, extremely fast. I panicked and ran as fast as I could back into the house. I came in so quickly that it freaked my mom out, and she yelled at me, saying, "What happened?" My dad was home this time, and I told him and my mom what I saw. She told my dad to look at me, that I was pale and white as a ghost. My heart was also racing, so he got his gun and went outside to look around. But he didn't find anything, or at least he never admitted that he found anything. This is the story that freaks me out the most. I actually got chills and goosebumps from writing this one down, even though it happened almost 30 years ago. There are many other little things that also happened in the house, like things being moved or cabinet doors being opened. My family also has their own stories of things that have happened to them individually. Multiple people have said they can feel something in that house. The only other thing of note is there is a very creepy abandoned well and well house right behind the house that has always creeped everyone out if you got too close to it. You can feel a presence near that old well. My mom passed away a few years ago, and my dad has remarried and moved out of the house. But my younger brother and his girlfriend now live in the house with their 1-year-old son. I've noticed, interestingly, that since us kids have gotten older and become adults, the strange occurrences have pretty much stopped. The only thing that has happened recently is that my sister and her son were living with my parents a few years back, and my nephew would randomly look down the hallway, smile, wave, and say hi, even though no one was there. I'll be interested to see if things start up again as my brother's son gets older. People can be skeptical all they want, but after mine and my family's experiences, I 100% believe in the paranormal. I don't know what it is. From Addie X. I have a big family. Just 2 years ago, it became a family of 8. We live in a small apartment with only 2 small bedrooms. I share a room with my older sister, my younger sister that is only 1 year younger than me, and my younger brother. We have bunk beds. My younger sister has been sleeping in my bed with me because she saw a roach on her bed. Our apartment is infested with huge roaches. In our room, there is a small closet. In that closet on the ceiling, there is a sort of door to go up, I guess. We've never been able to go up there, but I always see it slightly opened. The closet is really full, so the only way I can close it is with a hair tie tied on the doorknobs. This will become important later. I'm currently a junior in high school, but when I was in 7th grade, I was sitting in the living room. The door to my room is right next to the living room, and I swear I saw a head. It was like it was crawling on the ceiling, because the head was upside down. This thing, it had no face, but I could see where its eyes and mouth were meant to be. It had dents where its eyes were supposed to be. I blinked, and it was gone. I told my family, but they said it was just my imagination. My mom said it was from all these scary movies I've watched. A few months after that, I walked past the bathroom, which I hate passing by when the lights in there are off, because it always feels like someone is watching me. When I walked past it, the lights were off, but on the door I saw these long, sharp fingernails and a face peering out. I decided to ignore it, because that scared the crap out of me. After that, every time I would do the dishes, I would hear footsteps behind me. I would see figures in the corner of my eye. But that was all, until a couple of months ago. I was taking a shower, and my shoes were just outside of the shower. I never close the shower curtains because I feel like there is someone on the other side. I was rinsing my hair when I saw something move. It was my right shoe. I thought maybe it didn't actually move and I was just imagining it. But sure enough, it moved again. I pretended not to notice it, because I was scared. I finished showering and ran out of the bathroom. A few months after that, I was sleeping on my bed and I had a dream. I dreamt I was on my bed and my younger sister was lying there too, but her feet were on top of mine for some weird reason. But then I noticed there was a third pair of legs on my bed. I told my sister and we both freaked out. We moved to the opposite side of where these legs were coming from, which was under my bed, and we saw a hand reach out to try and grab us. The hand had long fingers and long fingernails. It was trying to grab us. As it was getting closer to us, I heard my mom calling my name. I woke up, and it was actually my mom calling me. She asked me if I wanted some crepes. I was shaking with fear at the moment, but I guess she didn't notice it, since she was just waiting for an answer. I nodded my head yes, and she went on. For some reason, every night since then, I've noticed the hair tie I've been using to keep the closet doors closed has just been hanging on one of the doorknobs, leaving the closet wide open. Every time I close it, I always end up seeing it open the next time I see it. I've asked every possible person that could open that closet, but they always say no, it wasn't them. And I believe them. I don't think they're lying. I'm not sure if something is living up there, but it's really creepy. I do have another story. My younger sister told me that she had fallen asleep on my bed with her headphones on, and her phone still on. She said that she woke up but pretended to be asleep still when she felt me take her headphones off and turn her phone off and put it on the charger. She opened her eyes when she heard me walk away, so that's how she knew it was me. But it wasn't me. She didn't know it wasn't me. A week later, she told me about this, and I told her that couldn't have been me. She didn't believe me, but I know she wanted to believe me even if it meant that she had an interaction with something out of the ordinary, without even knowing it. A few days after she told me about that, I woke up at 3 a.m. I saw something tall with a human-like form. It was crouched over, just staring at me, watching me sleep. But it didn't have a face. When it saw I had woken up, it simply stood up and walked away. I'm not sure if that was just my elder sister, and I had just imagined what I saw. But I was terrified. I fell back to sleep 2 hours later. I often find a lot of my things missing. Sometimes they aren't where I left them. Sometimes I never find them. I don't know if that thing is here to hurt me and my family, or if it just made my home its home at night. But I've lived in that apartment my whole life. I'm currently writing this at a school because I'm scared of what the thing could do to me. I always feel like it's watching. If I turn a corner, I'm afraid it might get me. Cowboy Creature from Semi-Aquatic Exotics. I've had brushes with the paranormal before. Sleep paralysis, that heavy feeling of being watched, even what I thought were ghosts when I was a kid. But nothing in my life comes close to what happened after me, my brothers, and a close friend moved into an old 7-bedroom house tucked away into the woods. I'm 22 now, and at the time I lived with my 3 brothers, Malik, who was 20, Adrian, who was 19, and Jalen, who was 16, along with my friend Cameron, who was 20. We'd all been struggling before that. Malik and I were crammed into a 1-bedroom suite that ran us $1,300 a month, while Cameron was still with his parents. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't sustainable either. One night, Malik and I were drinking with Cameron's dad. Let's call him Paul. And we mentioned how tired we were of our living situation. Paul said his coworker Ray had a spare house on his property. He didn't need the money, but he wanted people living there to keep it up. When we first saw it, we were caught off guard. It had 7 bedrooms, but it was filthy. There were snakes, toads, and way too many wasps for comfort. Ray told us if we got it cleaned, we could live there for $600 a month. Considering what people charge for a single room, it was the deal of the century. We put in the work, got it fixed up, and moved in. That's when the strange things began. One evening, I was over at Cameron's parents' house with him and Jalen. His mom, Mrs. Turner, was trying to convince him to look into college. She thought maybe if I was there to back her up, he would listen. I tried, but his stubbornness rivaled a mule's. We were laughing and talking over food when my phone rang. It was Malik, and he sounded shaken. He asked if we were outside the living room window. I said no, we were still at Mrs. Turner's. His voice dropped. "There's a man outside the window staring in. He's wearing a red flannel cowboy hat and has no face." That alone made my stomach turn. My phone had been on speaker, so Cameron and Jalen heard every word. We quickly said goodbye to Mrs. Turner. We piled into my car and drove back. No one was hurt, and no windows or doors had been touched. But Malik pointed out the tree near the living room window, the one we never cut down, even though it threatened to break into the roof. He swore that the man had been standing right there. We checked the ground there, the grass, the dirt, even the path toward the road. Nothing, not a footprint. We tried to forget about it. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Cameron and Jalen had gone to Walmart late at night for snacks and bathroom supplies. This left me, Malik, and Adrian at home. About an hour later, the front door slammed, and they rushed inside, pale as sheets. The bags of groceries were left scattered outside. They said when they pulled into the driveway, they saw a man peering through the living room window. It was too dark to see details. Cameron turned on his flashlight, and that's when they both froze. The figure was already facing them. Red flannel, cowboy hat, no face. Except this time, there were 2 glowing yellow lights where its eyes should have been. They said it looked like it had been caught in the act. Then their lights went out, and they bolted. At this point, I had 3 eyewitnesses. Malik first, now Cameron and Jalen. I was starting to believe something might be out there, that something might be wrong with this place. But still, I wasn't completely convinced. Cameron and my brothers weren't waiting, though. They grabbed kitchen knives and went outside to confront it. I stayed behind, honestly thinking the whole thing was getting out of hand. I just wanted to eat and watch YouTube, not chase shadows. But minutes later, the front door burst open again. They stumbled in, out of breath. They said they had gone around the house, then toward the road. That's when they saw someone standing there, perfectly still. When they tried to get closer, the figure suddenly dropped to all fours. They panicked and ran. That did it. This time I went too. All 5 of us stepped into the night, each clutching knives we knew wouldn't help. We walked the property, then down the road. But we didn't find anything. I was about to turn back when I saw it. Across the road, standing just beyond the tree line, was a dark silhouette. Enormous, 8 or 9 feet tall. Too far to make out details, but I'll never forget the stillness. It was worse than movement. A mannequin might sway, a scarecrow might shift in the wind, but this thing stood with an unnatural, suffocating stillness. We started toward it. Then it dropped onto all 4s, but not like a man crouching, more like a spider. Its chest seemed to scrape the dirt as it scuttled forward, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't. My stomach turned, and all of us froze on the spot. That's when headlights swung around the bend. The creature jerked its head backward without moving its body, like a turtle craning its neck. A truck screeched to a stop, and the driver's door opened. It was Ray. Without a word, he pulled out a rifle and began to fire. The creature bolted into the field, vanishing into tall grass and the old sheds nearby. Ray swore it had to be a crackhead of some sort, but the look on his face told me even he didn't believe that. He handed out rifles, the one to me, one to Cameron, and told us to help search. We didn't dare split up like you would see in the movies. We called out, threatening to call the cops. We swept the fields for nearly 2 hours, but found nothing. The police took our statements, but brushed it off as a vagrant. I can still see the way it moved in my head, the way it dropped and crawled with its body against the earth, like something not bound by bones. It's been several months since that night. We haven't seen the faceless cowboy again. But sometimes when I pass the living room window, I feel it, that heavy certainty that something is still out there, watching from the tree line. Yo, my Australian fans, you guys never told me you had a skinwalker hunting people on farms. I wonder if it transforms into the greatest Australian monster of all, an emu. Good night. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find me on X at Dark Prevails. And did you know I want your scary stories of the unknown? You can send them to me at darkstories.org, where I can review and possibly even narrate them in a future episode. Thank you. To help us grow, be sure to follow, rate, and/or review Unexplained Encounters on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Heck, why not both? Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Spooky month is coming, and I have no idea what to do. Look, I'm one guy operating several different podcasts and a YouTube channel while raising 2 kids. My creativity has long since been locked in the basement. So what do you want to see us do for Halloween? Leave your ideas in the comments. Now join me in the lounge. I bought a bonsai tree to help simulate tonight's theme: scary and true deep woods horror stories. Enjoy. These are tales from the break room. A story from a conservationist. From Anonymous. I've spent 12 years tracking bird migrations in Washington and Oregon. Last fall, I found out why every animal with a functioning brain was avoiding a particular valley in the Cascades. It started with data that didn't make sense. We'd been tracking several species that migrate through the same corridors year after year. They're creatures of habit, these birds. But about 3 years ago, multiple species started to take this massive detour around one specific area, adding 50 miles to avoid maybe 5 miles of valley. That kind of behavior usually means something catastrophic happened to the habitat. so I received funding to go investigate. It took me a while to convince the department, but eventually they gave me a grant for a 6-week study. I figured I'd find evidence of a chemical spill, or maybe some disease killing off the food sources. When I got there in September, the valley looked normal. Better than normal, actually. Untouched old-growth forest that developers would kill for, with clean streams and healthy undergrowth. Everything that a migrating bird could want. Except the birds were gone, and the same could be said for much of anything else. I set up my base camp at the north entrance and started doing standard surveys. The soil samples came back clean and the water tested fine. Plant diversity was exactly what you'd expect. But when I checked my motion sensor equipment after the first week, I had thousands of triggered photos showing absolutely nothing. Just empty forest. The cameras were working. I'd see a branch move or leaves stir, but no animals. The really strange part was finding where the deer trails just stopped. These paths that get worn down over decades of use, and they would just end abruptly at the valley perimeter. I followed one where the track showed a doe walking normally. Then suddenly the stride length tripled, indicating she'd started running back the way she came. But there were no predator tracks, no signs of a disturbance, just sudden panic. And then I started to find teeth. It happened on my second week. They looked like human molars, scattered along the main trail like breadcrumbs, somehow fresh enough that some still had blood on the roots. I counted 43 teeth over a half-mile stretch. No other bones and no signs of violence, just teeth, placed there in the middle of the path where you'd have to step over them. There was an old Forest Service cabin about 3 miles into the valley. I'd been avoiding the place, camping in my tent instead at the valley entrance. But after finding the teeth, I decided I needed a more secure base. The hike to the cabin was the most uncomfortable 3 miles I've ever walked. Nothing happened, but that was the problem. In a healthy forest, things happen constantly. Birds will call and squirrels will argue. Insects buzz. This was just my footsteps and my breathing, and nothing else. The cabin was unlocked. Inside, someone had been living there recently. I found fresh food in the pantry with receipts from last month, and a clean sleeping bag on the cot. But covering one entire wall, there were hundreds of photographs. These weren't modern photos, but old Polaroids, all showing the same thing, close-ups of what appeared to be human skin. Different skin tones, some hairy, some smooth, some with moles or scars, but just skin. No faces, no identifying features. They were arranged by color gradient, light to dark, like paint samples. The logbook by the door had normal Forest Service entries up until last year. Then the handwriting changed. The new entries were just numbers. Measurements, maybe. Things like 7.3 inches, 2.1 pounds, with dates beside them. The final entry was from 3 days before I arrived. Almost ready. One more practice. I should have left. Instead, I convinced myself I was overreacting. Someone was playing an elaborate prank. Yeah, maybe a graduate student was doing some bizarre art project. So I stayed. That first night in the cabin, something breathed on the window. Not a tap or a scratch. It was definitely breathing. The glass fogged up in a perfect circle, about head height. Then another breath, lower down. Then another, at ground level, like something was crouching down, slowly. When I finally got the courage to look outside with my flashlight, there were no tracks in the dirt. But there was a handprint on the glass, from the inside. I checked every corner of that cabin. I was alone. The second day I tried to focus on my work. I set up more equipment and took more samples. I tried my best to ignore that feeling that something was walking exactly in step behind me, matching my pace perfectly. When I'd stop, the feeling would stop, and when I'd turn around, nothing. But once I stepped deliberately to the side without warning, and I heard one more footstep behind me before the silence caught up. That evening I saw my first real evidence. I was testing water pH at the creek when movement caught my eye upstream. There was someone there, kneeling by the water, washing something. They wore Forest Service khakis, but something was wrong about the way they moved, like extremely careful, as if their body was made of glass and they desperately wanted to avoid breaking. I called out a greeting. The figure slowly stood up without using its hands, just smoothly vertical, like they were pulled up rather than standing themselves up. The figure turned toward me, and I saw its face. It was completely normal, bland even. Generic male features, probably 30 years old. But the skin didn't fit right, like a mask, except it was definitely skin. I swear to God, I could see seams at the hairline that puckered slightly.
Hello.
It said, in a voice like someone had recorded 100 different people saying the word and played them all back at once.
I am practicing interactions.
I asked who they were, what they were doing out here. They said,
Becoming better at being seen.
Then, it tilted its head exactly 90 degrees sideways without moving its shoulders.
Your skin fits you so naturally. How long have you worn it?
I backed away. It didn't follow, instead watching me with unblinking eyes. When I was about 50 yards away, I saw it reach up and begin adjusting something at its hairline, pulling and smoothing like someone adjusting a ski mask. I ran back to the cabin and barricaded the door. I spent the night sitting against it with my knife out, listening. Around 3 a.m, something knocked. Not aggressively, but politely, 3 gentle raps. "I'm sorry if I startled you," came a perfect imitation of my own voice. "I'm still learning the appropriate boundaries. May I ask you some questions about your original form?" I didn't answer. My voice continued. "I can see you through the wall. Your heat signature is beautiful. All those warm organs tucked so neatly inside. Do you ever feel them move around? Do you notice your liver sliding against your ribs whenever you breathe?" It kept talking until dawn. Questions about human anatomy that were technically accurate, but deeply wrong in context. Asking about the sensation of peristalsis, whether I could feel my cerebrospinal fluid circulating, if I'd ever counted my teeth from the inside using just my tongue. When sunrise came, the voice stopped mid-sentence. I waited another hour before opening that door. There were no footprints outside, but there was a neat pile of clothes on the doorstep, a Forest Service uniform. The fabric was still warm and slightly damp. I left immediately. I didn't pack my equipment up. I ran to my truck and drove straight back to Seattle. My official report was brief. Environmental factors were inconclusive. The area was unsuitable for continued study and dangerous. I recommended that no future research be taken. The department was more than unhappy about the abandoned equipment and my lack of results. I was chewed out, but luckily I didn't lose my job. I've been thinking about moving to a different department, a different place altogether. Maybe move to the Midwest, Somewhere flat, somewhere with fewer forests, somewhere I can see things coming from miles away. But sometimes I wonder if running matters. I wonder if the thing in that valley was unique, or if there are more of them, learning to wear our shapes and practicing to become human, getting better every day at fitting in. I think about those photographs on the cabin wall quite frequently. All that skin carefully categorized, like someone studying for a test. Those clothes left on the doorstep still warm, still damp with something that wasn't quite sweat. The animals knew first. They always do, don't they? We're just slower to notice when something is wrong, too wrapped up on our data and theories and modern life to see what's right in front of us, or behind us. The Scout Stalker, from Carbohydrator. I've been involved with Boy Scouts for several years now, first as a parent volunteer and now as an assistant scoutmaster. Over that time, I've heard a lot of stories from other leaders at training sessions and summer camps. Most are funny mishaps, maybe close calls with wildlife. But there's one set of stories that's different. 3 separate scout leaders from different troops have told me about encounters with the same person. Or at least, we think it's the same person. The first story came from Harrison, a scoutmaster from a troop about 2 hours south of us. This was back in 2019, at a regional training weekend. We were sitting around after dinner, and someone mentioned dealing with difficult parents, which led to Harrison telling us about something that happened to his troop the previous summer. They were doing a 5-day backcountry trip in the national forest, about 15 miles from any road. On the second night in, they'd made camp near a creek, and the boys were getting ready for bed. Harrison was doing a final head count when one of the younger scouts, a 12-year-old boy on his first real wilderness trip, came up and said there was a man standing in the woods, watching them. Harrison assumed, or rather hoped, it was just another hiker, someone who had made camp nearby. He grabbed his flashlight and walked over to where the kid was pointing. About 30 yards from their camp, just visible between the trees, was definitely a person, standing completely still. They weren't even trying to hide, but they weren't approaching either. Harrison called out hello and asked if they were okay or needed help. The figure didn't respond, didn't even move. They just stood there, so Harrison walked closer, keeping his flashlight on this individual. And then he saw the details that made him stop. The man was wearing clothes that didn't match, a suit jacket over cargo shorts, dress shoes with no socks, a winter hat despite it being July. And his face was dirty, streaked with something dark. It could have been mud or dirt, but it was applied with purpose and patterns, like a football fan's face paint. And he was smiling. This was no friendly smile. Harrison described it as a kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Harrison told the man this was a scout camp and asked once more if he needed some help. The man finally spoke, but what he said didn't make sense. He said,
"The young ones, they have such clean feet. Do they know about the crawling time yet?"
Harrison immediately went into protection mode. He kept himself between the man and the campsite, telling him firmly that he needed to move along. The man laughed. Harrison described it as the sound a dog might make if it could laugh. And then he asked,
"Which one is your favorite? The small blonde one? He looks tender."
That's when Harrison radioed the other adult leader to get all the boys into their tents and zip them up. He stood there for about 10 more minutes, flashlight on this man who was just standing there still smiling. Then, without warning, The man dropped to all fours and scuttled backwards into the darkness. And I mean scuttled, sideways like a crab, faster than you'd expect. They kept watch all night. Around 3 a.m., they heard someone singing softly from different points around their camp.
You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
But they never saw him again. They packed up at first light and hiked out a day early. Harrison filed a report with the Rangers, but nothing came of it. The second story I heard about 6 months later from Paula. She leads a troop 3 towns over from mine. Her encounter was different, but had enough similarities that it made me connect the two. Paula's troop was doing orienteering training in state forest land. There were groups of 3 scouts each, navigating between checkpoints with compasses and maps. Paula was stationed at checkpoint 4, waiting for the groups to come through. She'd been there about an hour when she noticed someone moving through the woods to her east. At first, she thought it was a scout group that went off course. But as the figure got closer, she realized it was an adult man, and he was following one of the scout groups from a distance. The boys didn't seem to know he was there. He was staying about 50 yards back, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped. Paula immediately radioed the other leaders and started moving toward the scouts. As she got closer, she got a better look at the man. Mismatched clothes again. Rain boots with suit pants, a Hawaiian shirt under a heavy winter coat, despite it being warm. His hair was long and matted with leaves and twigs wound into it. She said it almost looked on purpose, like decoration. When Paula intercepted the scout group and told them to head directly to the next checkpoint, where another leader was waiting, the man stepped out from behind a tree. He was holding something. It looked like tufts of hair, and it wasn't his hair. There were different shades of hair. Some blonde, some light brown, some darker. He held out the hair toward the boys like he was offering candy.
Would you like to trade?
He asked.
Your hair for my hair? I've been collecting it from brave boys like you.
Paula put herself between him and the scouts and told them to run to the next checkpoint, quick. They did. The man didn't try to follow them. He stood there, shaking the hair in his cupped hands. Then he looked at Paula and said,
You're too old. Your hair's all ruined. But those boys, they're still fresh.
She backed away, keeping eyes on him, until she herself reached the next checkpoint. By then, other leaders had arrived. When they went back to look for the man, he was gone. But they did find a neat pile of hair where he'd been standing. The police said without DNA testing they couldn't confirm whether the hair was human or not, and the department didn't have budget for that unless an actual crime had been committed. The third story is the most recent, and the most disturbing. This came from Joaquin at the big regional jamboree this past summer. His troop had an encounter. They were camping at an established scout camp, the kind with permanent structures and designated sites. Should have been much safer than camping in the woods. In the middle of the night, Joaquin woke up to one of his boys crying. This kid, he was 14 years old, a tough kid usually, was standing outside Joaquin's tent, trembling. The boy said he had gotten up to use the bathroom, and when he came back, someone was in his sleeping bag, in his tent. He thought it was another scout messing with him, until he realized all 3 of his tent mates were still in their bags. So there was a 4th person in the tent, in the kid's sleeping bag, facing away from the entrance. Joaquin grabbed his flashlight and went to check. Sure enough, there was someone in the sleeping bag, and it was no child. Whoever it was an adult, and they weren't moving. Joaquin shouted for them to get out, and slowly the figure sat up and turned around. Again, this person wore mismatched clothes. Looked like he was wearing multiple shirts and a child's rain jacket that didn't close around him fully, and pants that were far too short. His face had those same dirt markings, the ones that looked like they had been applied. And he had that same creepy smile. But this time Joaquin noticed his fingernails. They were incredibly long and had been filed or perhaps chewed to points. The man crawled out of the tent on all fours, dragging the sleeping bag with him briefly before letting it go. He stood up right in front of Joaquin, close enough that Joaquin could smell him. He smelled like wet pennies and spoiled milk. The man whispered,
"The boy kept it warm for me, so I kept it warm for him."
Then he reached out with those pointed nails and touched Joaquin's chest, just lightly, leaving small tears in his shirt.
"You're keeping them too safe. Boys need danger to grow properly. I have ideas for you."
Joaquin yelled for the other leaders, and the man turned and walked into the woods. Not ran, but walked, humming something that sounded like a lullaby. They found footprints the next morning that led to the camp's fence line, then nothing else. The fence was 8 feet tall with barbed wire on top. No sign of how he got over it, or if he did. Here's what makes these stories especially concerning. These campsites were in different states, hundreds of miles apart, at different times of year, different troops with no connection to each other. But the description is always similar. The mismatched clothes, the dirt patterns on his face, the way he moves, sometimes on all fours, sometimes sideways, the obsession with the boys, their warmth. We've started sharing information between troops now. There have been 2 more possible sightings since Joaquin's encounter. One group found a shelter made of sticks near their camp, with scout handbooks arranged inside. Another found footprints that followed their hiking trail for miles, always staying just off the path, with those same long toenail marks in the dirt. Some of us think he might be accessing troop information somehow, looking up public event calendars or social media posts about camping trips. That would explain how he finds different groups in wilderness areas. But it doesn't explain what he wants, or why he hasn't actually hurt anyone yet. The optimistic view is that he's just a mentally ill homeless person who has a fixation on scouts, but is essentially harmless. But those fingernails filed to points suggest preparation. The hair he was carrying, the way he got into that tent, into that sleeping bag without waking anyone. These feel like escalations. We've reported everything to both local and federal authorities. They take the reports, but say without actual assault or crimes beyond trespassing, there's not a lot they can do about it. One ranger suggested he might be a former scout himself, someone who had a breakdown and was trying to relive something from his youth. But that does not explain the predatory behavior, or the comments about the boys being tender or fresh. We've had to change how we do camping trips now. There's always 3 adults minimum. No scout goes anywhere alone, even to the bathroom. We post watches through the night. We vary our locations last minute whenever possible. Some troops have stopped doing backcountry camping altogether, sticking to established camps with better security. But established camps don't guarantee safety. Joaquin's encounter proved that. We don't know his name. We don't know where he comes from or where he goes between encounters. We just know he's out there, watching our boys and getting bolder. Off the Trail, from Indestructible. I want to share an experience that happened to me and my friends right after high school graduation during the summer of 2004. It all started when we went hiking in a remote part of the wilderness. To give some context to this experience, I need to explain how my friends and I met, namely one of them who got us into this mess. I grew up with my best friend, Chad. We were inseparable, almost like brothers, until 6th grade, when someone came that would change our lives. That spring, a new student joined our school. His name was Shad. Shad was unusually tall for a 6th grader, 6'6" to be exact. He had fair skin and thick brown hair that looked like strands of yarn. Everything about him was awkward. His movements, his mannerisms, even his backstory. He said he'd moved to town from an Indian reservation. Initially, he was polite to everyone, but when people started to joke about how his name rhymed with Chad's, Shad began picking on Chad relentlessly. Shad's bullying lasted for the rest of the school year. I should also mention he stayed with his aunt and uncle just down the street from Chad, but he didn't make any real friends, probably because he bullied just about everyone. During the summer, we'd often ride our bikes past his house. He was often outside shooting hoops and would shout insults or taunt us as we passed by. We weren't exactly kind in return. One day while we were riding by, a basketball came out of nowhere and smashed Chad in the face. Chad crashed hard onto the pavement. Then Shad came after him, and the two started to fight. Thankfully, our elderly neighbor, Mr. Johnson, stepped in and broke it up. He called 911. Chad ended up with a broken nose, 2 black eyes, and scraped up arms. It was pretty bad. The day after that, Shad was gone. His aunt and uncle said he'd gone home, and Chad's parents, though furious, seemed content with that resolution. They enrolled Chad in jiu-jitsu with me after that incident. He recovered quickly, though he was disappointed that he didn't have any cool scars to show for it. We didn't see Shad for the rest of the summer or 7th grade. The next summer he briefly reappeared, but he avoided us whenever he saw us. By the time 8th grade rolled around, what happened was just a bad memory. That changed during the first day of summer after 8th grade. I was over at Chad's house, watching him play Final Fantasy VII, when the doorbell rang. It was odd. None of us ever used the doorbell. Chad and I exchanged confused looks before he got up to answer it. Moments later, I heard scuffling and a scream, one that definitely wasn't Chad's. I ran to the door and found Chad and Shad tangled up, punching and yelling. I tried to break them apart, but I bolted to Mr. Johnson's house for help. By the time we returned, Chad was unconscious, and Shad was sitting on the ground, bloodied and sobbing. His right arm was in a cast, which was now broken into pieces. This time the police came, with an ambulance. Both Chad and Shad were taken to the hospital and kept overnight. It was the first time I truly felt like an outsider. Chad's parents were difficult to get in touch with, and I was left in the dark. Meanwhile, Shad's aunt, uncle, and parents were constantly at the hospital. My parents eventually came to pick me up and wouldn't let me go back. The waiting was torture. You see, Chad was like a brother to me, and now I wasn't allowed to see him. On the second day, I learned he was being kept another night for observation due to a concussion. When Chad was finally discharged, I rode my bike straight to his house. I didn't even use my kickstand to park. I just jumped off and ran inside. What I saw nearly made me faint. Shad was sitting on the couch, cast and all, playing Crash Bandicoot with Chad. "Dude," I shouted, "what's he doing here?" Chad looked at me unfazed. "I called your house like 3 times. "Really?" I shot back. "But it's Shad. What's going on?" Chad explained everything. They were put in the same hospital room for 2 days. Apparently, the basketball incident 2 years ago wasn't intentional. It had bounced off the backboard and hit him by accident. This year, Shad had come over to apologize and make amends, but Chad panicked and instinctively started to fight him, re-breaking Shad's arm in the process. Shad then told me that on the reservation most everyone was related. At school, kids fought against other kids who were not in their family. It was a whole other culture, and he had to learn the hard way that that isn't the way he needed to be. He initially had moved here to see how he would like school here with his aunt and uncle, but after the basketball mishap, he got scared and took a Greyhound home. That summer was tough for me. Honestly, I was jealous that Chad and Shad had become such close friends out of nowhere. I felt like a third wheel most of the time. They acted like long-lost brothers. Shad was constantly staying over at Chad's house and sometimes at mine. He even joined jiu-jitsu. Once I got to know Shad better, he wasn't the person I'd made him out to be. Eventually, the three of us started calling ourselves the Three Amigos. That summer brought big news for our town. A huge announcement was made. We were getting a new hospital, a mall, a major company's call center, and most exciting of all, the old ski slope that had been shut down since the 80s was purchased and slated to reopen. Our town was about to grow in a major way. Freshman year had started, and this year Shad stayed in town. We'd never had so much fun before. Shad was nothing like the bully he used to be. He became the class clown and a star athlete, dominating football, basketball, and track. Part of the year, Shad hit a growth spurt, and he grew so fast he was hunched over until his body could adjust. He had shot up to 7'1". The guy was a tower. The next summer, as the town grew, people began moving in for the new opportunities. Even though the hospital wouldn't be finished until after our senior year, doctors were already relocating to the area. One of them moved down the street from me with his large family. The oldest daughter, Angela, was our age. She was incredibly quiet, as shy as a church mouse, as they say. Later during sophomore year, Chad, Shad, and I were assigned to a group project, and Angela ended up in our group. The first thing Shad did was call her Andy on purpose. She was upset at first, but Shad explained he called her Andy because her red hair reminded him of the character from the Goonies. The nickname stuck, and before long, everyone called her Andy. Just after our group project, we saw Andy in the hall with a well-known senior who thought every girl wanted him. He wouldn't stop bothering her. So Shad walked right up to that senior bothering her and told him off. A fight nearly broke out. But after that, Andy became part of our group, like the sister we never had. We were a quirky bunch, but we stuck together all through high school. Remember, this was a time before the internet was common. If we wanted entertainment, we actually had to watch TV. During senior year, we'd get together to watch Tales from the Crypt. There were two commercials we loved to mock. One featured a guy talking about the new mall, saying, "Come on down, see the sights, and remember to bring the family." The other was for a local travel agency. It ended with a camera panning over a forested area, and we always joked, "Someday we'll go hiking there." Well, we soon found out where that area of land was. Shad and I got a job at the end of our senior year to place GPS markers and flags through several sections of some wilderness just south of us for new wilderness trails. The trails summited several lower elevation mountains for more moderate hikes. When they showed us the pictures of where the trails would be going, we noticed one of the areas was over the same mountainous area as that commercial. "Imagine that," Shad joked. We had till September, pretty much summer, to finish placing all the markers. We didn't think it would be so bad, but when we received the supplies, packs, maps, GPSs, and the marking material, we were a bit overwhelmed. The flag shooter to place the marker flags was a bit bulky, and it felt like we were given miles of ribbons. Shad commented, "Glad we don't have to carry this all at once," which reminded me that we were doing just small sections at a time. We were told that the ribbons through the wooded areas needed to be placed every 250 feet. and in the valleys, marker flags would need to be placed every 0.2 miles, unless the trail curved. We planned to have Chad and Andy join us for the first area to mark, since their jobs didn't begin until a few weeks after graduation. Like all parents, Chad and Andy's parents had concerns about our plan. We reassured them that having these GPS units and plenty of supplies, we would be okay. Early one morning, we drove the 50 miles to the trailhead parking lot, unloaded our gear, and started our adventure/work. By noon, we'd hiked about 6 miles and reached the base of one of the mountains where the current trail snaked around. We took a break, had some snacks, before we began the ascent. Since no obvious trail existed, we had to rely strictly on the GPS units. Our GPS showed we were at about 5,200 feet elevation, and the mountain's summit was around 8,400 feet. Not too high. The plan was to hike until 7 p.m., placing markers according to the map, then set up camp below the tree line and summit the next afternoon. Then we'd make our way down the backside and connect to the existing trail. But our plans changed around 3 p.m. that day. As we hiked up the mountain, we realized placing the markers was a lot slower than we expected. When we reached a spot where it leveled off, something fluttering in the wind caught our eye. Hanging in a tree was a silver mask attached to a black cloak. Shad reached over and pulled it down. We all examined it. The mask's mouth was a creepy grin. The eyes' sockets had these wrinkly rings going around them, and the forehead had 2 small horns adorning it. The cloak was shiny like silk and was more like a suit. It had a cloak in the front and in the back. Underneath the front cloak were loose sleeves and leggings. Shad, being the joker he was, immediately dropped his pack and put it on. The cloakish suit covered him, but not completely due to his height. The sleeves that hung loose came to his elbows. Before he stood up, he started doing the Kazatsky kick, a Russian dance where you crouch and kick out your legs. We laughed so hard, but when he stood up, the cloak almost reached his knees. "It's a hobbit's cloak," he joked. Andy commented on his funny appearance, and then reminded us of the markers we had to do. "Come on, let's get back to marking so we can finish up on time." Then we heard it, a faint whisper on the wind. Voices. Our laughter went to silence in an instant. Then, in the distance, we saw someone else, wearing the same cloak, the same mask. Chad broke the silence. "Looks like they left this one behind." Andy froze, eyes wide. "Let's leave," she said. Her voice was shaky. "Now, please." Before we could act, Shad had vanished. "Where's Shad?" I asked, in a panic. Then I saw a cloaked figure running off in the distance. "There he goes," I whispered. Without thinking, we followed him, crouching low as we moved.
"Where is he?"
A strange voice called from the trees. We stopped, hiding behind a small grove of trees, and stashed our packs. The cloaked group stood in a strange formation. Chad snuck off to get a better look, then came back. "There's a big ring of rocks in the clearing, with a 6-pointed pentagram in it." "It's a hexagram," Andy whispered. "Did you see him?" I asked urgently. "I don't know which one would be him," Chad whispered. "Let's get closer. We'll have a better view from that fallen tree." He pointed to the other side of the group of masked individuals. We silently made our way up through the forest, coming down to the tree. Peering through the branches, we could see something in the center of the hexagram that was covered by what appeared to be a bloody cloth. "Is that blood?" Andy asked, panic creeping into her voice. "No, it's ketchup," I said. "I hope it's not a body," Andy whispered, her eyes bulging with fear.
"Where is he?"
a voice from the circle asked. We noticed a gap in the hexagram. One spot was missing a figure. Then we saw Shad walking toward the circle, his movements strange, his height very much shortened, as he appeared to be crouched down and bunched up inside that masked costume. "You can tell that's Shad," Chad whispered. "What's he doing?" "I don't know, but that is definitely him," I quietly replied. Shad must have inspected the scene as he stepped into the circle, taking the vacant spot. From behind the fallen tree, I strained to get a better look at the masked group. They moved with an eerie synchronicity, slightly swaying in their spots, their cloaks slightly rustling in the breeze. The circle wasn't random. Each of them stood in precise alignment, their positions at each point of the hexagram. In the middle, the figures were standing at the crossing intersections. The blood-streaked cloth was at the center. One of the figures on the cross-section suddenly stepped forward to speak. His voice was deep as he addressed the group.
"The offering has been made. Now we summon him. He who dwells beneath the earth, whose power we crave."
He stepped back and raised his arm as others followed.
An offering from the sky.
The figures on the outside of the circle recited.
An offering from the land.
The figures inside the circle spoke. Their arms moved straight. Shad's movements were hesitant by the undersized ensemble as he followed along.
"Grant us thine power, he who dwells below."
They all chanted in a haunting melody.
"Grant us our desires, our souls we give."
"Stop, stop, stop!" An angry voice suddenly rang out from the trees. It made almost everyone jump. A shirtless man in his briefs stepped forward, holding Shad's pack. His shirt draped over his face to hide it. The cloaked figures turned toward him. "One of you," he said scoldingly and pointing, "has my silver shade. Give it back. I demand it now and you'll go free." He dropped the pack on the ground. All the figures turned to look at Shad. It was clear that since he was the last one to join, he must be the imposter. I hoped he would just take off the cloak and grab his pack, but he didn't. Instead, Shad let out a low, menacing laugh, a growl that sent chills down my spine. He began to shake, his voice deep and eerie. "Master, grant me power to grow so I may seize these false men who pretend to know thee." Shad's figure trembled as he slowly rose, his height increasing unnaturally to those that didn't know him. The cloak rose to end at his knees. Several figures in the circle stepped back, but some moved toward him. "Let my arms grow so I may seize those who do not know," Shad growled. He pushed his arms through the sleeves then, stretching them out to what they might see as unnatural lengths. He now looked almost twice the size than when he was hunched up.
"Leave,"
he commanded, his voice echoing.
"None of you are true believers."
Shad's towering form must have shocked a few of them, as several of the figures on the outer edge of the circle backed further away. But the ones in the middle moved closer. I didn't know what would happen next, but I couldn't wait any longer. I whispered to Chad and Andy, "Andy, throw whatever you can to draw attention once we go in. Just wait for the right moment. Chad, remember the Uchimata? The throw?" I motioned with my arms low. "Let's use the forest floor to our advantage. It won't be as soft as a mat." Chad nodded but looked doubtful. "What if they start a fight?" He lipped to me. "Then we fight back," I said, almost under my breath. We crawled to the end of the tree where it had uprooted and readied ourselves. I wasn't planning to attack, I just wanted to cause some confusion by taking down a few of the masked figures. We needed to get the attention off of Shad, so he could run and we could get out of there. While Shad had everyone distracted with his towering presence and commanding voice, Chad and I made our move. We dashed out from behind the fallen tree. I'm sure Chad was just as nervous as I was. We took the two masked figures we snuck up to, off guard, and flipped them onto their backs with a swift throw. A thud sounded as they hit the forest floor with muffled grunts. Others then turned to see the commotion. As we moved past the bloody sheet, it got pulled away to reveal a dead, bloody rabbit and bird. It was apparent that if they had killed those animals on the spot, they had at least a knife on them somewhere. From behind the dead tree, Andy started to hurl sticks and pine cones. Her aim wasn't effective, but it did distract a few of them. One of the projectiles struck a cloaked figure square on the head, who was facing Shad, making him divert his attention. Shad, seeing our effort, joined the fray. He grabbed two of the masked men by their cloaks, lifting them up, causing them to fall. The remaining figures hesitated, unsure of what to do. Shad seized the moment, dashing past the shirtless man, grabbing his discarded pack as Andy yelled, "Let's go!" The shirtless man stood stiff like he didn't want to move. Shad, after grabbing his pack, turned and yanked the shirt off his face. For a moment, we saw his shocked face clearly, before he could cover it with his hands. It was the man from the mall commercial. His face was unmistakable, even with his wild, unkempt hair and crazed expression.
"Come on down, see the sights, and remember to bring the family,"
Shad bellowed, perfectly mimicking the man's cheerful tone from the commercial. His voice echoed through the forest, adding to the confusion and chaos. The rest of us scrambled to grab our packs. My adrenaline was surging. We joined Shad in his mad dash down the hill. He still wore the mask and cloak, the silver face catching glimmers of light through the trees as we ran. As upset as I was, I couldn't help but laugh. Behind us, a few of the cloaked figures gave chase, their voices carrying an unsettling mixture of anger and confusion. But the uneven, rocky descent worked in our favor. It quickly became clear that these masked pursuers weren't in any shape for a downhill sprint. Their footsteps grew fainter as the incline steepened, and soon they gave up entirely. We did not stop running until the sound of their pursuit faded completely. My lungs were burning by then, when we finally paused at a cluster of boulders further down the hill. Shad yanked off the mask and cloak, collapsing onto the ground in exhausted laughter.
"Master, grant me power to grow,"
he mocked himself, still breathless. We couldn't help but laugh too. A mix of relief and disbelief washed over us. Andy doubled over and gasped for air, then finally managed to speak. "That was the dumbest, stupidest, most idiotic thing," she trailed off, struggling to catch her breath. Chad, sitting on the ground and equally out of breath, let out a raspy laugh.
"Stupid? Yes. Dumb? Definitely. Funny? Oh yeah. And even funnier now,"
he added with a crooked grin, wiping sweat off his face. I sat there silently, my heart still racing, unsure of what to say. The weight of what had just happened hung in the air. Shad, sprawled out on a rock and still catching his breath, finally broke the silence.
"I'm sorry guys, I couldn't help it. But come on, how was I supposed to know a cult selling their souls was gonna be up here?"
He chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of his neck.
"Dude, we'll have to do this section of the trail last. I'm not gonna go back up there for a while,"
he finished saying to me before falling silent again. "Yeah, sounds good to me," I quietly replied. It was quiet for a minute or two until Andy spoke up. She shook her head, getting our attention. "You're lucky they didn't do more than just chase us." Her voice was calmer now, but her expression still showed a mix of fear and disbelief. "They could have had a gun. It was stupid, but yeah, it was also funny." She grinned a little. Once we'd all caught our breaths and gathered our wits, we agreed it was time to head back to the trailhead. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees as we retraced our steps to the trail. By the time we made it back, the parking lot was still empty. Andy's car was the only car there. The stillness of dusk added an eerie edge to the adventure we just had. I pulled out the map and scanned it. "There's another trailhead entrance a little further south," I jokingly pointed out. Andy shook her head firmly. "No way! What if they parked over there?" We all exchanged glances and quickly agreed against it. None of us were eager to take the chance of running into that group again. Instead, we decided to call it a day and head home.
That section, like Shad said, would have to be the last section of trail we would have to finish marking. Shad and I finished up all the section of trails by mid-August. We saw lots of hikers, but never a big group that was near in number as the masked group. For months afterward, that commercial haunted us each time it played on TV. The mall man's familiar face and cheery tagline sent a chill down our spines. "Come on down, see the sights, and remember to bring the family." It was a joke we couldn't laugh at without the shivers. We went to the mall a few times afterward, hoping to catch sight of him, but he was never there. He probably didn't have much to do with the mall and could have just been an actor in the commercial. The other masked figures, they remained a mystery. Who they were or why they were out there, we never found out. It was clear, though, they were up to no good. Selling their souls for something, chanting those eerie lines, it still gives me chills to think about. To top it off, there's now a trail that runs right through that area. It's strange to know there are people like that out there. You expect the woods to be filled with natural dangers. Bears, snakes, cliffs. But sometimes the scariest things in the wilderness aren't the animals. Sometimes it's the people. We had a good mix of stories tonight. Scary, funny even, some wholesome moments too. But don't go getting all safe and happy feeling, got it? At least pretend to leave Dead and Roasted tonight feeling a little scared. My job's on the line after all. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Send me your scary work-related stories at eeriecast.com/submit and leave a rating or review on Apple or Spotify podcasts. Thank you. Now I've got to clock out, but don't you worry, I'll be seeing you again real soon.